across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, a very good afternoon. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Tuesday afternoon. There is a lot to discuss, including David Lammy on his feet at the moment in the House of Commons taking justice questions, because guess what? 91 prisoners have been released in error since April. Between April and October, there were 91 prisoners. We'll be talking about that. We'll be talking about the meltdown at the BBC. They now say they're looking for a new Director General, a new Chief Executive of News. But Tim Davie, the outgoing Director General, seems to have come out fighting in all of this and said that the institution is under attack from its enemies, as he says. Does he actually get it? They made a huge mistake. They doctored the words of the President of the United States. That's why they're in the situation they're in. Also, we'll talk about migrants who are going to stay at the Bell Hotel. Another court ruling, the final one now, despite the asylum seeker Hadish Kabatu's sex attack and the fact, let's remember, he was released by mistake as well. And finally, after 135 days, Pascal Robinson Foster is finally interviewed by Avon and Somerset Police. He is being interviewed about his chant death, death to the IDF. He's under caution and he's being interviewed there. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about former heads of the army attacking Keir Starmer on human rights laws. They've said in a big letter in the Times today, quite a number of senior people and former senior people, that people look at the enemy in front of them, and indeed the lawyers behind them are brave servicemen and women. We'll talk about that. Charles Moore, Lord Moore, is on a little bit later on the BBC as well, and we'll find out what is in the Sun too. Plenty to discuss here on Talk. I want to get your voice on the air. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, send me a voice note, less than a minute please, send me a WhatsApp text message. You can also give me a ring on 0344 499 1000. Loads to discuss between now and 7. Stay with us here on Talk Drive. As I said, there are loads of ways to get in touch. I've actually received a couple of letters as well. I'm going to read out a little bit from them a little bit later on, from Anne, who is in Stoke, and also a woman called Mary, who is in Coventry. They've both written to me the old-fashioned way, and we'll read out a little bit of what they have to say about their communities a little bit later on. So you can get in touch in all sorts of different ways. The main one, of course, is to give me a ring, get your voice on the air, 0344 499 1000. We're keeping an eye on Parliament to see what is happening there, what David Lammy is saying about these 91 prisoner releases. But for the meantime, I want to talk about the BBC. Suzanne Franks is with me. She's a former BBC broadcaster and Professor of Journalism at City University. I've got to declare an interest here in that from April I'm going to be doing some lecturing on a part-time basis at City University as well, so I've got to declare that. Suzanne, we had a bizarre situation today where Tim Davie coming out fighting, talking about enemies of the BBC. The BBC certainly has its enemies, but doesn't he quite get the fact that the reason this crisis has happened is because of things that could have been fixed, that they could have fessed up about, but didn't? Oh, I think you're muted, Suzanne. If you can, you've got your back. Sorry, Suzanne. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think there are two things going on at the same time. Can you hear me now?
I can. Go ahead. Yeah, great stuff.
Okay. I mean, one is that a series of mistakes have been made and some very basic errors have been carried out, and I'm just hoping these are not students who were, or these are not producers and journalists who were educated at City University. I haven't heard yet. So anyway, there's a series of mistakes have been made. There's lack of proper scrutiny, and particularly I think there's an issue which hasn't been highlighted much yet, but is about the whole status of independent producers and indies, as we call them, and the extent to which they are kind of overseen and scrutinised properly by the commissioning editors and by the BBC.
There was certainly a big problem that was blamed for the problems with the Gaza documentary.
But also with the Panorama as well. Mm-hmm. But there's that going on, and then I think at the same time there are a number of institutions and individuals that are, out to criticise the BBC, whatever happens. And I think both these things are going on at the same time, and we shouldn't mix them up and confuse them.
Do you believe the outgoing leadership of the BBC is perhaps mixing them up? Because we have a lot of quite senior people, John Simpson, James Landale, Nick Robinson, and the Director General Tim Davie, who seem to be talking in quite combative terms. I want the BBC to succeed as a public service broadcaster. I want them to be a service that people recognise as impartial. But I just wonder if this kind of language around it, including actually politically from Sir Ed Davie as well, about without actually explicitly, straightforwardly acknowledging that the reason Tim Davie has gone, or one of the reasons, the main reason anyway, is because of a botched edit.
Yes, yeah. I think you might well be right. I think a lot of people have confused these two issues. There are mistakes, and mistakes should be confessed, and they should be scrutinised, and proper systems should be in place so that these things don't happen again. That's on the one hand, but I do think there are also, a number of institutions and politicians and so on. For example, you heard Nigel Farage straight away jump on the bandwagon, that are out to criticise the BBC, whatever they do, and who are, not great fans of public service broadcasting, including, of course, Donald Trump, who's probably not a great fan of
although he is the victim in all of this as well. So what about the kind of management, the checks that need to be done, for example, in Panorama and the Gaza documentary as well, where you have a small army of executive producers within the BBC who are meant to oversee these things, who certainly in the case of the Gaza documentary don't seem to have asked basic questions. And when it comes to the Trump documentary, well, how can accountability actually be brought? Because it wasn't Tim Davie and it wasn't Deborah Turness, the chief executive of BBC News, that made that edit. It wasn't them who signed it off, I would imagine. But they, of course, took have resigned as a result of it.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The systems in place. There may well be an army of editors and so on, but it's clearly not working, and it's particularly not working in the area I've just mentioned, which is where you have small independent production houses, being commissioned by the BBC and then doing things rather at arm's length, and maybe not being wholly honest when they're challenged by the editorial figures inside the BBC. So
how do we get trust back in the BBC and public service broadcasting? Because I often think the only thing that's different between someone in their kitchen with an iPhone and me, or alternatively the BBC, is just resources and, quite frankly, trust as well, because anybody can be a broadcaster these days. I wonder how much of it you think is perhaps at least within that atmosphere of the fact that there are lots of different ways in which people are accessing. It's not as if we all sit down at 6 o'clock to watch the news on the BBC anymore. Things have changed to a huge degree, especially with young people, and if they don't trust an organisation, they're not going to rely upon it to get news.
Oh, you're absolutely right. There needs to be mechanisms in place that mistakes are not being made on this kind of regularity, and that audiences are then able to trust, whether it's however you get your news, whatever your route is to getting news. You need to know that these are facts and they've been properly checked, and that the individuals don't have another agenda or aren't being sloppy and careless, all of which I think has gone on in this case.
And Suzanne, when you get the more information about this BBC review finding that US election coverage was markedly anti-Trump, that to me wasn't a huge surprise, it must be said. Did that surprise you?
Probably not. No. I think anecdotally, one would have probably reached that conclusion. Absolutely, I think you're right.
So, what can be done about that when you have people talk about Trump derangement syndrome, people who just dislike Donald Trump no matter what he does or no matter how he succeeds in any way, and there will be people who'll never give him credit for the Middle East peace deal. They'll never give him credit for opening up relations with North Korea, for example, which are two things I think he should be praised for. But other people will never do that. Is that groupthink? Is that people coming from a particular perspective? How can you combat that and say, right, the next time something like this comes around, let's say, for example, J.D. Vance runs against Gavin Newsom in the next presidential election, how can we do it better the next time from the BBC's perspective in a way that people will trust them?
Well, I think you're right that you need to guard absolutely against groupthink, and you need to have mechanisms in place that things are being questioned and criticised and critiqued from all sorts of points of view, that we aren't just sort of all just agreeing with each other in our own happy little silos.
So how do you do that within the BBC? Sorry, I'm jumping ahead here, but is that to do with class? Is that to do with background? Is that to do with the type of people who are recruited for the BBC? I mean, how do you combat that? How do you actually get a fair representative group of people making television who will say, right, well, these views aren't crazy? I mean, I worked for Newsnight for a while, and I know one person who worked there telling me that they were the only person who openly said they voted for Brexit.
Yes, I think having a diverse workforce is obviously an important element of that, and certainly at City University, where we train hundreds of journalists every year, we are very, very conscious of that, of trying to make sure that the pool of who gets to make these decisions and do this work is as wide as possible. So that's one area. But the other is to put in place editorial standards and mechanisms, which happened again after I remember this is a long time ago, but there was another massive BBC crisis around the time of the Iraq War and the dodgy dossier and so on, which you may be too young to remember.
No, I remember it. I remember it, yeah.
But anyway, after that, they did put in place a lot of mechanisms like the BBC Academy and having sort of better accountability chains and so on, and people responsible for sort of editorial policy and so on. And maybe that all needs to be looked at again to make sure that we're not just all sort of agreeing with each other and stuck in the same groove.
Okay, Suzanne, thank you very much. This is Suzanne Franks, former BBC broadcaster and Professor of Journalism at City University. Ian has been in touch from the Wirral and says, "Good afternoon, Peter. Always love your programme. Keep it up." Thank you, Ian. Much appreciated. Everyone mentioned the awful things the BBC have done, but no one mentioned the Martin Bashir Princess Diana interview in Panorama in 1995, where Diana was hijacked by Bashir, who produced forged bank statements that caused terrible problems within the royal family. I wonder if the BBC are calling this a mistake or an error rather than a premeditated lie. Well, Ian, there's a really interesting article actually in the Sunday papers about that. I think it's actually been serialised all this week in one of the papers, and there's a new book out about all of that and what Martin Bashir did. He's clearly a total charlatan. Jane says, "It is not Trump or Farage that is the problem. It is many of your audience who don't trust the BBC. Your guest doesn't seem to realise they will never watch or trust the BBC ever." And Dawn says, "I heard David Lammy is answering questions. Let's hope he gets some of them right this time." Says Dawn, yeah, he's still in the House of Commons. If anything significant or major is said there, of course, we will bring that to you. Georgina is in London and has given me a ring on 0344 499 1000. You can do the same thing, of course, and it'd be great to hear from you. Georgina, what do you make of this ongoing BBC scandal? We keep being told it's a mistake. Well, actually, it's a doctoring. It's a botched job, isn't it?
It absolutely is a botched job. I've listened to quite a few broadcasters over the last couple of days, and I've got to be honest, these are not mistakes, Peter. These are premeditated acts. The film with Donald Trump, the document when he was speaking, that was edited, it was spliced, and it was put back together. That takes time and effort. That was premeditated. Also, the documentary where the little boy was a child of one of the Hamas top people.
Terrorists, yes.
That also was known. And they knew who this child was. They just did not declare it. These are acts. And also with Hugh Edwards. He's a pedophile, and they're still paying him.
Well, they're not still paying him now, it must be said, but they did continue to pay him. I wonder what you make of this, Georgina, about the BBC's coverage of the US presidential, found to be markedly anti-Trump and pro-Kamala Harris. That was an internal review by a senior editorial advisor, and there's some really interesting stuff actually, because this was further issues about the Panorama episode Trump a Second Chance, broadcast 8 days before the election last year. He accused the programme, this is the person who wrote the report, David Grossman, he accused the programme of using misleading footage of the Proud Boys group marching in the Capitol, as well as showing images of Trump grimacing, shaking his head and looking uncomfortable after being challenged by his rival Kamala Harris on his criminal prosecutions during a televised debate. This reaction shot, the report read, has been taken from another part of the debate. In reality, Mr. Trump looked blank and indifferent in the face of this particular attack. So it wasn't just the clip. There were many, many other problems with that broadcast, with that programme.
Absolutely, and you're quite right, Peter. I mean, I feel that they were trying to sabotage the electorate by showing clips that weren't from the actual time. You know, they were splicing it all together and editing it, and it wasn't true representation.
And we've got to remember that 60 million Americans have access to the BBC. They may not watch it all the time, of course, but they do get BBC broadcast, 60 million Americans. So, you know, this was 8 days before the election.
Absolutely, but I don't watch the BBC anymore, and I haven't for a long time, because I found them to have been pushing their own political narrative, Peter, when the British Broadcasting Corporation should remain impartial. You know, we need to strip this BBC back to the bare bones now to totally eradicate the rot, the biased, the left-wing woke ideologies that the BBC have been pushing for goodness knows how long. And they got away with it without taking responsibility or accountability until now. You know, beforehand it was just a quick, we're sorry, it's a mistake. Well, I'm sorry, these aren't mistakes, Peter. You know, but... Oh, sorry, darling.
No, go ahead. Finish your point. Go on ahead.
I was just saying, but when they're going to take a pot shot at the President of the United States and think they're going to get away with it, that goes to show how untouchable the BBC thought they were. But what you've got to remember, Peter, that this is a serpent with many heads. You know, we've got two of the top heads, but this is a veritable Medusa.
Well, you're absolutely right, Georgina, and there are far more people who need to consider their position. It wasn't Tim Davie and Deborah Turness that made all the errors. They're simply the top people, and the culture change is what is needed. Georgina, thank you. I want to play a voice note now. You can send these in, of course, on 0344 499 1000. This is from Wayne.
The NHS and the BBC are pretty much one and the same thing when you think about it, because they don't like scrutiny. They think they're above everyone else, like they've got some sort of halo around them. You can't talk or say bad things about them because they're the BBC or the NHS. They don't want to reform. They don't want to do anything but ask for more money or cost save or anything along those lines. They are the most arrogant organisations I can know. You know, in a capitalist world, if you're that arrogant, you ain't going to survive. But because they're the NHS and because they're the BBC, they literally think they can do what the hell they like.
Wayne, thanks for your thoughts there. June has also texted in to say, I'm so fed up with the BBC. People blaming everyone else. They brought this on themselves. Biased news, not talking about rape gangs. Savile, Rolf Hallish, Hugh Edwards, allowing the overpaid Gary Lineker to spout his views. I could go on and on and on. Thank you for all your views. Keep them coming in. 0344 499 1000. Lift the phone and let me know what you think about the BBC, or alternatively about the Bell Hotel. We're going to talk to Jamie McIver in just a second, the Reform UK councillor, because the Bell Hotel will continue to host migrants despite all the protests, despite the fact that Hadish Kabatu was involved in carried out a sex attack against a 14-year-old. Despite all the protests that Jamie and his comrades have been doing there, this will remain open, and that's final. That's what the court says. So we'll talk to him in just a second. Stay with us.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thanks to Paul in Worcester, who says the BBC is undeniably biased. My biggest gripe is the use of partisan audiences on Question Time. I simply don't buy that they use a cross-section of people. I feel the audiences are packed with leftist sympathisers and the token right-wing panellist is generally heckled. I've stopped watching, says Paul in Worcester. Thanks also to the person on Twitter who doesn't like my pronunciation of the word Moore. Charles Moore is going to be on with us later. I can't pronounce it with an English accent because I don't have one. Similarly, English people do struggle with some words like choir, for example, which is seldom pronounced correctly. So that's just a small hill on which I will die, undoubtedly. Let's talk about the asylum row. Migrants are to stay in the protest-hit Bell Hotel. Despite asylum seekers' sex attack and controversial final ruling, The Sun says migrants are going to stay in the Bell Hotel. This is after a judge made a final ruling despite the asylum seeker Hadish Kabatu carrying out a sex attack against a 14-year-old girl. The Ethiopian, of course, has been deported now, but the Tory-led council wanted an injunction granted that would permanently ban migrants from living there. Many other councils as well looking at this. It's a body blow, really, for the campaign. One of the campaigners is Jamie McIver, who's a Reform UK councillor in Epping. Jamie, thank you for joining me today. You must be very disappointed with this.
Well, good afternoon. I mean, I'm just devastated for the people of Epping. I'm devastated for the victim of that awful crime and all of her family. I'm devastated for our country because Epping, I think, for many people has been a beacon of hope and a potential end to this nightmare that we are living in as a country. And today it feels like that has been snatched from us. In what country does a court put the rights of illegal migrants above its own citizens and the concern that they have? We have in Epping women too scared to walk their dog, girls too scared to walk to school, and it would appear that the government is very much on the side of the people in the hotel rather than the tax-paying working people of Epping. And I just think it is an insult to those wonderful people in Epping. This is a strong community, and this news is awful for us. But you know, I will just say that I can't believe of all the days for this hearing to take place and for the government to do what they've done on all the days on Armistice Day. Could this not really have just waited one day? Today we should only be talking about one thing, and that is the sacrifice of those brave men and women that fought for our country so we would have freedom and democracy, rule of law and borders. And instead we are talking about this, and I think it goes to show how broken Britain really is.
Although some might argue this is, as you say, the rule of law. This has gone through the legal process. It's got to the end point. You obviously disagree with it, as I'm sure most of our viewers and listeners will as well. What's next, Jamie?
Well, on that point, if I may, throughout centuries of this country, Britain taught the world law and order, and very intelligent people throughout our history have made laws in the mother of all parliaments, our parliament, and those laws were there to protect the British people. And unfortunately, those laws are abused, and those laws are hijacked by left-wing socialist lawyers, in my opinion, sort of one that's now occupying number 10 Downing Street. Our Prime Minister is one of those people who I believe hijacked those laws and make them work against the British people, including the ECHR, which had noble noble intentions when Sir Winston Churchill enshrined it within our own legal system. Again, something being abused. But you say, what's next? Nothing is going to change. That hotel, for as long as it remains, will be the subject of peaceful protesting by the people of Epping. Do the government really think that mums are just suddenly going to stop worrying about their safety of their daughters overnight? Do you really think that dads are going to stop worrying about the safety of their daughters overnight? Do you really think that women are going to stop worrying about their own safety overnight? Absolutely not. The town of Epping is not safe. We have the data to prove it now. A 14-year-old schoolgirl was sexually assaulted in her school uniform. The individual was convicted and sentenced, and don't get me started about the accidental release. But the point is, for all we know, in that hotel at the moment is somebody else that may prey on a young girl. That is not scaremongering, that is the reality. I'm not suggesting that everybody in that hotel may do that, but I'm not going to tell you that they won't, because we don't know who they are. They are unvetted young men, and they are walking the streets of Epping as we speak because of that hotel, which means they're walking past a secondary school with other 14-year-old girls in it. I am disgusted with the government today, but what happens next? We will continue to peacefully protest, and I urge people to peacefully protest in places like Epping and across the country. And I also urge people now, if you feel so strongly about this, people must rise up through the democratic process and get involved, because that's the only way we're truly going to change this country, because it's not just about today's injunction. This is a bigger problem. The country is borderless. Hundreds and hundreds of unvetted men, enough to fill an A380 up at least twice a week, are coming to this country illegally on small boats. It is an invasion at our shores, and people, we will only stop this problem if we control our borders. Until then, until we leave the ECHR, detain and deport people en masse, I'm afraid this will continue to happen.
Well, it's very interesting you mentioned the ECHR. We're talking later in the programme actually about a number of current and former Army chiefs who've written to the Times today to say the ECHR is hamstringing them. You've talked a lot about the government, you've talked a lot about the authorities. What about the company making the profits from this hotel? What is your view of them, and will you continue to petition them to change their mind?
Well, of course, you know, we are in a free market economy and businesses are going to seek to make money. Obviously, I think there is a huge patriotic, ethical argument to say that what they are doing is wrong. They are enabling the incompetence of this government and the previous government to continue with their incompetence by enabling a hotel like this to be used for what it is. Ultimately, I think that the owners of the Bell Hotel should turn it into a hotel for people to book and stay at when they visit beautiful Epping Forest. Let me make it very clear to your listeners and your viewers, Epping Forest is a beautiful part of the world. I'm so proud to live here. I'm proud to serve this community as a councillor. And that hotel should be a place that people want to stay at, get married at. It should be a place that employs people. So I would urge the owners of that hotel to work with the council to make that hotel what it should be, which is a hotel for tourists.
Okay, Jamie, thank you very much. That's Jamie McIver there, Reform UK councillor in Epping. What do you make of that ruling, the final ruling now, saying the Bell Hotel in Epping is to stay open and that asylum seekers are going to continue to live there? 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Thank you to everybody who's been in touch as well. And there we have it, the requirements of illegal and in some case criminals trump the real concerns of local people. And our government did this to us. On a basic level, this was a planning issue, but woke appeal judges took it as anti-immigration. So can I build an extension without planning permission? Thought not. Gordon in Taunton says, I've had to pull over because I'm fuming. The BBC edit was not an error, mistake, blunder or oversight. It was a premeditated, targeted propaganda assault with the intention of interfering with the election the election campaign of our greatest ally. All this from a compulsory on pain of incarceration purchase to fund the propaganda branch of the civil service. I utterly despair that even North Korea wouldn't attempt an utter insult and yet smirk on our faces when challenged. Another log goes on the pyre, says Gordon in Taunton. And Dennis in Manchester says, good afternoon, Peter. I've read somewhere that the report into the BBC's coverage of the US presidential election was pro-Harris and anti-Trump. Yes, that's right. That's what David Grossman, who was putting together these reports, concluded. That was put to the BBC board. Dennis continues, well, in other stunning news, it gets dark at night. The BBC, just like our government, made it clear they didn't want Trump to win again, and the Panorama programme was just the epitome of that. Great show as always, says Dennis. Lots more to come in all of this. We'll talk about what David Lammy is talking about at Parliament as well. 91 prisoners freed in error since April. Jack Elson, the political editor of The Sun, is standing by. We'll talk to him in just a second. Be sure to give me your thoughts on all of this, whether it's migration, the BBC, prisoner releases, whatever you want to talk about. 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, thank you to everybody who has been in touch, including Sean James Cameron, who says, don't forget Her Majesty the Queen and the false editing of the Annie Leibovitz portrait. That was by the BBC as well. Nat says, I have no complaints about your accent, Peter. It is hot. So there we are. Clearly Nat is a woman of great taste and discernment. In the last hour, the Justice Secretary David Lammy has been speaking in the House of Commons about the prisoner release scheme. He faced questions from his shadow counterpart, Robert Jenrick.
Will the Justice Secretary rule out any more early release schemes for prisoners?
Just before the general election in July, his government had 3 different versions of their early release scheme, and we inherited a situation, and he knows this, where prison capacity was completely unsustainable, and successive Justice Secretary under his previous government have said that in the last week. We brought forward our early release scheme. It was important to do that, to put capacity into the system, but it's the sentencing bill that will begin to deal with this issue in a comprehensive way.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you strip all that waffle back, he didn't deny it, did he?
Very interesting exchange there. And you'll notice that we didn't bring you the whole hour. We brought you a short bit of the hour. It's called a clip. And what we did to signify that it wasn't the whole hour was to put a white flash in the middle. That's a little edit that tells you time has passed, things have happened, but actually we're not changing the meaning of what goes on there. Something perhaps the BBC could start doing. Let's talk to Jack Elsom, he's political editor of The Sun. Jack, 91 prisoners freed in error over the last 7 months. How much pressure does Lammy remain under?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's under pressure now to really show that he's gripping this problem, because last week what we saw at the dispatch box was an exercise in blame shifting, and to an extent the public will be sympathetic with that. The Tories themselves acknowledged that the prison system wasn't exactly tickety-boo when they left office, and it has had drastic underfunding for a long time now. But I think the public are really sick of hearing the Tories from this Labour government, who asked for the job and are now the ones with their hands on the levers of power. And so the question is, what is Lammy going to do about it? He said last week that he'd initiated the strongest checks ever, but still we had 2 prisoners released after those checks came in. Lammy today said that at least one of them, the Algerian national, was the mistake which led to him to be released in error was actually a problem which happened in September. And so we had a month passed, apparently, between when the mistake was made in September by the courts. So he was actually released then in the middle of October. So how that stacks up currently remains to be seen. But the wider point now is that Lammy is saying that what we need to do is really get away from this paper-based system, which they're blaming much of the mistakes on, and instead move to a digital system which is fit for the 21st century. So the Ministry of Justice have literally just put out a press release saying that they're going to be moving to using more AI to try and get a grip of the system, and proper cutting-edge technology, because at the moment it does seem that a lot of these mistakes are genuine human error. Now, to a point, I think that ministers can realistically say, of course, we cannot be across every single sign-off of every single prisoner to make sure that they are they're being released correctly. But at some point, the buck does stop with someone, and it is, I think, incumbent on the Justice Secretary now to really make sure that prisons are staffed properly, to make sure that the adequate checks are in place, because, even though, and Lammy was making the point that 50,000 prisoners are released every year, and we only have about 200 mistaken releases, the public will, I think, be pretty alarmed if there are any mistaken releases.
Well, exactly. It should be zero. It doesn't mean, it's like the BBC documentary. It's like, well, most of it was fine, yeah, but there was 99% of it might have been fine, but 1% of it wasn't. The Mrs. Lincoln's evening at the theatre was going really well until someone managed to shoot her husband. Jack, does this actually help David Lammy in a weird way with the budget coming up, when all the government departments are always trying to get more money? And he will go to Rachel Reeves and say, look, clearly there's a crisis, clearly we need more money, in his view anyway, and give it to us. Let's build loads more prisons, let's pay officers more money.
Yeah, well, the government have already committed to more capital spending on prisons to try and build some new ones, because that's what they desperately need. They can't just keep on letting people out of the release valve and back into the community. At some point, they actually are going to have to increase incarceration capacity. And so that will probably get a nod at the budget, although I think they've already said that they're going to build a few more prisons in the country, because clearly they're needed. I think
Lammy was actually at the launch of one of them last week in the middle of all of this, and I'm not sure the photo opportunity of him with a spade digging was perhaps the best visual metaphor that he wanted to put across from a communications point of view.
Once a special advisor, always a special advisor. You can spot the comms crisis from a mile off. But you're right, and David Lammy, I think the only thing which might good come out of this is I think it will focus his attention, because there are people in government that thought that he was more interested at being the Deputy Prime Minister than he was being the Justice Secretary. And he wanted essentially to use that bauble he was given when he was demoted from the Foreign Office to keep doing his job, where he flew around the world in front of the British flag, shook hands with a lot of powerful people. Now I think this is a massive kick up the backside, that actually the job of Justice Secretary is a full-time one, which requires a lot of attention. It's one of the most important jobs in government. It clearly comes at a time when he's on a bit of a sticky wicket with the prison crisis. And if anything good can come out of this prison crisis scandal, it hopefully will focus his mind to get on with the day job.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about the BBC, because Starmer has ducked demands to ditch the licence fee. He said the BBC is stronger than ever. Clearly the political fallout of all of this continues, and he believes in public service broadcasting, and presumably, for the moment anyway, the licence fee. We've got the Royal Charter renewal talks coming up. Could Lisa Nandy be perhaps even tougher than Keir Starmer on this?
Yeah, I think we think the licence fee is going to be on the table here. What the government actually want to do about it, I don't imagine there's much appetite to move away from it. But, you know, these conversations, I think, need to be had now, because many people see the licence fee as something from a bygone era where you didn't have a plurality of TV shows, streaming services and the like, because it is at the moment, you know, in stiff competition amongst lots of other things. And, you know, we always make the point, and I've seen a lot of commentary in the past few days of people going, yes, clearly the news division has issues, but think about all the great things. Think about the traitors. Think about Gavin and Stacey. You know, think about, you know, all those different channels, which are great, and I love them. But I can also say the same thing about shows on Netflix and shows on Apple. And so I don't think that argument holds much water, because there are great shows on loads of different platforms, and you know the other platforms are forced to stand on their own 2 feet and make their own way, operate in a market where if they don't provide a quality service, then they don't get the customers. Whereas the BBC has the luxury of taking in £5 billion a year over the licence fee. And I've seen Tim Davies being out today at the BBC saying, you know, we have to fight for our journalism, which to an extent is true, but also to an extent they've never really had to fight, because they know they have a guaranteed income. It's not like, you know, it's not like Talk, or it's not like, you know, other you know, media platforms which are required to provide a good service. Otherwise, they live and die by their viewers, readers, listeners.
Certainly, and then the associated advertising that the BBC doesn't have to worry about. Let's talk about the two-child benefit cap, because earlier the Prime Minister appeared on ITV's Lorraine show. He spoke about a possible change of policy on the two-child benefit cap. Let's have a look at this, and then we'll find out what Jack thinks.
I can tell you in no uncertain terms, I'm determined to drive child poverty down. It is what the last Labour government did, and it's one of the things we were proudest of. I am personally determined that is what we're going to do. You won't have to wait much longer to see what the measures are. Some of them are already in place. The free school meals, the breakfast clubs, free childcare are all part of it. But look, we need to do more than that, and I can look you in the eye and tell you I'm personally committed to driving down child poverty.
Will that involve getting rid of the two-child benefit?
You won't have to wait much longer, but I wouldn't be telling you that we're going to drive down child poverty if I wasn't clear that we will be taking a number of measures in order to do so.
I mean, that's pretty straightforward there, that this cap may well be lifted. What do you think, Jack, and what are the big implications of this too?
Well, listen, when you talk about the two-child benefit cap, you always have sort of the moral argument around it. On the one hand, you have people that go, scrapping the cap is necessary to reduce levels of child poverty. But on the other hand, you have people saying, I don't want to pay more money for someone else to have children, and they should be doing that as responsible parents. You park aside that, I think what this really shows is how politically weak and vulnerable Keir Starmer feels at the moment, because he is not doing this to satisfy voters, because two things. First of all, polling even out today has shown that a majority of people support actually keeping the cap in place. A YouGov poll earlier this morning showed that that was a majority of public opinion. But also in the election, they were very clear, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, they wouldn't be scrapping the cap because they thought it was unaffordable. Now, the finances haven't suddenly got incredibly rosy to the point that they actually is now affordable. In fact, the opposite has happened, and Rachel Reeves is going to have to break her manifesto promise actually to put up income tax because at the moment the sums are not adding up. So it's a very, very hard sell for Rachel Reeves to go, on the one hand, the finances are bad enough, which means that we have to put up income tax, but somehow they're now good enough that we can go back on our promise and actually scrap the two-child benefit cap. And the reason she is doing it is because Labour MPs see this as their, cause célèbre, and it is sort of the thing which they have alighted on to really pile pressure on the Chancellor ahead of this budget. It is their key ask, and I think that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are currently too politically weak to stand up to their pretty mutinous parliamentary Labour Party. We saw how the parliamentary party can get organised and they can ambush the leadership. They did that successfully in the summer over the welfare rebellion, and now we're seeing it again. They are turning the screws on Downing Street, on the Treasury, to give them this main ask of scrapping the two-child benefit cap. And at the moment, Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are not in a position to say no.
Yeah. Just finally, before you go, Jack, the Bell Hotel decision has come through. It will stay open. The government fighting for that through their Home Office lawyers, but a lot of people very annoyed about it. I spoke to Jamie McIver a minute ago, and quite a number of our viewers and listeners too. What's your reaction?
Yeah, many people will be annoyed. Obviously, the initial High Court decision was that the small boat migrants would have to be moved out of there, being turned over by the Court of Appeal now. I mean, in terms of just optics, it is dreadful for the Home Office. Clearly, the Home Office feel they have a duty to try and keep migrants in this hotel. Otherwise, it will set a precedent, and it means that all the other councils can then launch similar appeals in their respective hotels. But to have a government which says that it wants to close hotels, fighting to keep one open, is just incredibly difficult politics in terms of the mere optics of it. And many people will just think that it absolutely stinks. And very soon after that decision came out, the Home Office put out a statement. And you know what the first line was, Peter?
Tell me.
We are furious at the levels of asylum.
Of course they are. They're always furious. Jack and I talk about this a lot. They're furious. They're incandescent. They're crazy. They're annoyed. Jack, thank you. I am furiously a fan of yours, telling us the politics of the day. So thank you. That is Jack Elsom, their political editor of The Sun. They use this language all the time. It's like they're not in the government. You're the government. Do something about it. 0344 499 1000 if you want to get your thoughts on this. Now, after 135 days, it's finally happened. They're finally interviewing Pascal Robinson Foster from Bob Villan about his horrendous chant, death, death to the IDF. Thank goodness they're finally doing it. Will they take further action? We don't know just yet, but that's even on Somerset Police. Nicole Lambert is standing by, the anti-Semitism campaigner and journalist. We'll talk to her in just a second about all of that. We'll get more of your views too. I can see the phones going 0344 499 1000.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thank you to the person who asked me if I named my cat Jack after Jack Elsom. No, I did not. I actually didn't even know Jack Elsom when Jack was there, and I didn't name Jack either. He came from the shelter called Jack, so we didn't want to change it. Anyway, that's a really important matter that has been put to rest. We'll talk now about Bob Villan and Pascal Robinson Foster, who finally, after 135 days, has been questioned under caution by Avon and Somerset police. Naomi Ripley has been in touch and says Bob Villan have a gig in London tonight. I bet they do it all again with no consequences. We'll see what happens there. Of course, we also know that they were in Dublin a couple of nights ago. It was a sellout, of course it was. Nicole Lambert is with me, the campaigner against anti-Semitism and journalist. Great to have you with us, Nicole. Finally, Avon and Somerset police bring him in for questioning. He's there voluntarily, of course. He could leave at any time, but he is under caution. It's about flipping time, isn't it?
Yes, I'm thinking, I'm sitting here in my jumper under my electric blanket in this cold November day, thinking back to the summer heat of him appearing with no top on at Glastonbury Festival, screaming not only about his Zionist bosses and how awful they were, but death, the IDF. And it's a chant that has now been repeated around the world in anti-Semitic protests and demonstrations. It can be heard. So he created this new chant. He's going to be performing, as you mentioned, at Kentish Town Forum, which is just down the road from where I live. And
actually, I've been sent this from. Someone sent it to me from Twitter. London-based agents of Israel, the flag is there, will be disrupting this event. Comrades will be counter-protesting. Join them. Bob Villan is welcome. There's no suggestion this is Bob Villan has organised this. This is a different organisation. Bob Villan is welcome. This is tonight at the O2 Forum in Kentish Town. Stand United for Palestine. Support artists who speak the truth. He has then retweeted it. Or Bob Villan anyway, Bobby Villan, which is the stage name of Pascal Robinson Foster, saying, much love to those organising and attending this in response to the Zionist protest planned for our show tonight.
Yeah, so there is a protest. There have been, I suppose the fact that he went before the police, and it appears that the police don't know what to arrest him for, and that's one of the hold-ups. And so they say they've been talking to the CPS for a few months now, and they talk to him on the result of that. So we don't really know if they are going to charge him, what they might charge him with.
Although well, you're absolutely right. And about 2 weeks ago, they said they got guidance from the Crown Prosecution Service. And the question, I suppose, would be, well, why can't you follow that guidance? Surely you must know by now, 135 days on, exactly what you could arrest him for.
Yeah, because what he did was something that we all saw. So we don't know whether tonight he's going to be repeating that chant, coming up with some other chants. When he was in Holland, he came up with some even worse stuff about going up and hurting Zionists. So tonight there is a demonstration outside. Well, I suppose you could call it a counter demonstration or a demonstration against him, and then there is a demonstration against or for him and against the demonstrators. So it's going to be quite chaotic in Kentish Town, which is quite a Jewish area. It's also Keir Starmer's area, so there were calls to him to try and cancel it, and he didn't. Bob Villan was cancelled in Manchester. I think the local council there were obviously mindful of the fact that then 2 people had been killed at a synagogue a few days earlier or a few months earlier. So there is all this going on, and of course there is the free speech argument, but it's Armistice Day today. We're thinking about our own soldiers that died. And whatever you might think about Israel or the IDF, it's a conscript army. It's of children, it's of boys the same age as my son. He's just gone to university. If he was in Israel, he would be joining the IDF. And he's calling for their death. And nearly 1,000 IDF kids, mainly kids, have been killed in this war. They're the kind of forgotten figure. It's never ever mentioned that. It's mentioned that 1,200 people were killed on October 7 and 250 were taken hostage and around 60,000 Palestinians were killed, but it's never mentioned that nearly 1,000 IDF soldiers have died trying to protect their country, which is what our own people did.
And the point as well about Bob Vilna is that he lied about it, Pascal Robinson Foster. He said he wasn't talking about soldiers specifically, and then lo and behold, footage came from the similar chant a few weeks previously where he said death, death, the IDF and IDF soldiers. So clearly that is what he meant. He'd said it before, and we're in a situation where he was interviewed by Louis Theroux, useful idiot in all of this, and he said, yes, I've no regrets, I'd say it again and twice on Sunday. So he is defiant about this, and it's up to Avon and Somerset Police to actually have a backbone, arrest him, and for the CPS to charge him here.
Yeah, and actually, interesting what he said on Louis Theroux. He doesn't care what he said. He says he's proud of what he said. It has led to him being banned from America, more or less. Yeah. All his gigs there were cancelled. But you call Louis Theroux a useful idiot. He was worse, because what they both talked about, they both kind of exchanged anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about how the far right nations, white supremacists, had learned from Israel, and so Pascal Robinson started it off, and then Louis Theroux continued it. Yeah.
I should clarify. I was meaning useful idiot to Pascal Robinson Foster. No, I think I agree with you that Louis Theroux was absolutely shameful there. Nicole, thank you, appreciate that. That's Nicole Lampert there, campaigner against anti-Semitism and journalist. Just to say that a decision not to award compensation to WASPy women, these are the women in regard to who thought they were getting a pension, they didn't get it for another 5 years. That's going to be reconsidered by the government because of undisclosed evidence, according to the Work and Pension Secretary, that's Pat McFadden. So that is the breaking news, that a decision not to award compensation to WASPy women is going to be reconsidered by the government because of undisclosed evidence to the Work and Pensions Secretary. That is what Pat McFadden has been saying. No doubt we will continue to talk about that story. That could be a big and costly decision for the government as well. There was some compensation that was given originally, but not a huge amount. Lots to discuss in the next hour here on Talk. Stay with us.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Good evening, it's just gone 5 o'clock. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. We'll bring you the latest on that decision not to award compensation to WASPy women to be reconsidered by the government. We'll talk about the BBC and what the Director General's been saying and have a debate about that. You can get involved too, of course, 0344 499 1000. Trump is going to sue them, or says he's going to sue them. The White House mulling a BBC reporter ban because of the doctored footage there. Two-child benefit cap to be lifted as well in the budget. We'll talk to we'll talk about what Keir Starmer has been saying on that, and former heads of the British Army attacking Starmer on human rights law. This is a really interesting one. We're going to talk to General Sir Chris Deverell, who is the former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command. Really, really interesting letter in the Times today. So much to talk about. I want to make sure that you get your voice heard on this station. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV, follow me at Peter Cardwell, send me a voice note, send me a WhatsApp text message, or give me a ring, all on the main number 0344 499 1000. Plenty to talk about between now and 7 o'clock here on Talk Drive. We'll talk about the Epping Hotel as well, and Bob Villan too. In fact, Paul has been in touch, who's a military veteran himself from Cornwall. He says on Bob Villan, as posted previously, Bob Villan did a similar thing at Glastonbury when he appeared at Boardmasters Festival near Newquay in Cornwall back in the summer months. Many people contacted Cornwall Council to try to stop him appearing, but nothing was done. The gig went ahead. Nothing about that heard on the media. Well, it has been now, Paul, and thank you for letting me know about that. Should also let you know that from Monday the 1st of December, our Talk TV app is on the move. All of your favourite shows and podcasts are going to continue over on the Talk app. So if you're watching or listening on the Talk TV app right now, you have it on your phone or your device, you'll need to download the Talk app from the App Store or Google Play. You can do it now, get it done, takes 2 minutes. I did it on my own phone the other day, all sorted and uninterrupted coverage of all your podcasts and favourite presenters and shows, both video and audio from Talk, so you can do that. Right then, let's take a look now at what the outgoing Director General of the BBC, Tim Davie, has been saying about the crisis engulfing the organisation.
We are a unique and precious organisation. And I see the free press, I see the weapon under pressure, I see the weaponisation. I think we've got to fight for our journalism. I'm really proud of our work, and the amazing work locally, globally that we're doing is utterly precious. We have made some mistakes that have cost us, but we need to fight for that. And I'm fiercely proud of that. And don't let anyone stop you thinking that we are doing a fantastic job.
Well, let's have a chat about this and what the future of the BBC is. Lots of people getting in touch about this as well. And one person says, "Hi Peter, even though I do think the BBC is biased, however, isn't all media slightly like that? All media outlets are a reflection of the kind of people who work there. Even with Ofcom, it's virtually impossible to be completely impartial." Well, I would agree with that. The point is, with the BBC, we pay them the licence fee to be impartial, and they've been egregiously not impartial on quite a number of issues, according to this report by Matthew Prescott. Michael Prescott, apologies, the former Sunday Times political editor. I want to talk to someone called Matthew now, Matthew Hulbert, the political commentator. James Price is also with me, former government special advisor. James, maybe I'll start with you. What do you make of the problems the BBC has had and the fact that the Director General, outgoing Director General, is coming out fighting in all of this?
Well, he's unfortunately not the only Director General to have to resign in
third one in a row.
Well, exactly. You've got the Hutton inquiry. I think that happened. You had the Hugh Edwards scandal. We've had the Jimmy Savile inquiry. We've had so many different things of this. We could do Martin Bashir forging documents to get that Princess Diana interview. Look, I don't think the BBC is beyond saving necessarily, and it's certainly not the worst news outlet in the world by any stretch. And having the impartiality rules in place stop it from going totally off the deep end, which I think is very helpful. But this report is pretty damning, and Mike Prescott, who you quoted there, is a newspaperman through and through. I actually had the privilege of working for Mike several years ago, so I know him well and find him a man of complete moral rectitude on this. And this report got all the way up to the top of the BBC, and the board and the rest of it looked at it and told the Director General, don't worry, you can ignore this. And then it came out that they had done these various journalistic no-goes of splicing together clips from Donald Trump speaking 50 minutes apart and completely changing the tone of what Trump has said. I think it's right that the top brass have to resign, but what about other people through the organisation who've actually done these problems? Are they going to go as well? Is there going to be an acknowledgement that there is a problem of bias at various levels of the BBC? Or are people just going to attack Robbie Gibb, the one Tory inside the BBC, and thereby proving the point of bias?
Matthew, what's your view on this?
Oh, good afternoon, Peter, and to James, and of course to your viewers and listeners. Well, my view is that the BBC isn't perfect. No human organisation ever is, but I think it does a really good job in often very trying circumstances. And I was thinking earlier on that the fact that it gets attacked as it does by both left and right, I think probably shows that it's just about in the right place most of the time. Now, in terms of this video, clearly it's been edited in a way that it shouldn't have been. But I also think, Peter, and would want to stress that I think its broader point was right, that Donald Trump did not want to accept the democratic outcome of a legitimate election, and some might think inspired what happened on January 6th that year.
Okay, so if we took this debate right now and I spliced together two bits of you saying something that you didn't say and presented that as fact, but basically said, well, Matthew is largely in support of the BBC, you'd be happy with that, because I think it's ludicrous that there's this argument that most of it was right, 99% of it was right. It's the 1% that isn't right. They made up a clip. They put together two bits that were incorrect and contradicted what he had actually said at the time. Your broader point may well be correct, but that's not the point in this, is it, Matthew?
No, it's not, and they've done wrong. And I said that at the start of my contribution, and that is why two people at the very top of the BBC have gone. But I also think we need to be frank and honest about another thing here as well, which is that opponents of the BBC, commercial rivals of the BBC, have an interest in doing down the BBC, and I think that's what we're seeing this week.
But it's not necessarily the commercial rivals who are doing it down. They're simply reflecting, at least in part, an internal BBC report, aren't they, James Price? And had it not been for this internal BBC report that was made public, and had they actually acted on it in the first place when it was brought to their attention, the three of us wouldn't be having this conversation, James.
Right. I don't even think it's right to call others commercial rivals. I don't know any other tax out there that forces me to pay for The Guardian, thank God, or punishes me if I listen to talkTV without paying you any kind of money or anything. This is the problem. The BBC model, I think, is fundamentally broken. And I wouldn't actually, like a lot of other right-wingers, just privatise it or sell it off or anything.
What would you do?
I would restrict its activity to, and I would keep some news in there, but with perhaps, you have to put the editorial decisions being live streamed on the BBC so you can see what goes into the sausage being made. I think that would be great fun to see how the editorial decisions go in. But crucially, what I would do would be to cut back so much of the other activity that the BBC does that could be done elsewhere. If ITV or Sky or even Talk want to make shows like Can Fat Teens Hunt, which is my particular favourite BBC show, then they can go and do that, and you can find commercials.
Sorry, what's it called? Can Fat Teens Hunt?
Hunt. It turns out not very well was the answer to the show.
My favourite BBC show.
The stuff that BBC was making.
There was a whole stream on BBC Three about 15 years ago that was the F off strand. Do you remember that one? And there were programs called, and they used the word, I'm obviously not saying it at 5:10 in the afternoon, F off, I'm ginger, F off, I'm a hairy woman, F off, I'm gay, all of that kind of stuff. That was actually a strand of programs on BBC Three, who also made the absolute classic Natalie Cassidy's Diet Secrets, which I'm sure is helped us all. Matthew, on a more serious note, what would you do with the BBC? Do you think it should exist as it is now, or how would you reform it?
I think it should absolutely exist as it is now. And, James in his earlier contribution said, oh, well, it's not the worst news organisation in the world. I think it's the best news organisation in the world, and it's respected worldwide, and especially
the problem is, Matthew,
the BBC World Service.
The problem is we've got a 19-page report that wasn't acted upon, that talked about many problems in its coverage of the Middle East being biased, the trans rights debate where real voices on other sides of it weren't heard, and that individual journalists were trying to prevent people being heard on all of that. The issue is you know, we've got doctored clips here. We've got, to say nothing of all the other scandals that have engulfed even Tim Davies' time as Director General. It can't continue to exist the way it is, can it?
Well, I mean, an organisation such as that should always be questioning the output that it puts out there. But for example, and again, this goes back to my earlier point in it probably being in just about the right place, you know, I've criticised the BBC for it not being pro-trans rights enough, because that is my view. I think the truth is here is that people want the BBC to reflect...
It's not impartial to be pro-trans rights, is it? That's not that's not an impartial position.
No, but the point I'm saying is, if I'm allowed to say it...
But hold on. You're allowed to say whatever you want in a second, but the point is you're saying the BBC isn't pro-trans rights enough. But my point is, if it's saying it's impartial, it can't be pro or anti-trans rights. It simply has to tell the truth about the debate that is happening with that, Matthew.
And so would you say the same on climate change, where the BBC got to a point where it was having to have on it, supposedly to be impartial, complete Fruit Loops who don't seem to think that the climate is changing and the...
Well,
and
some people might say that men saying they're women are Fruit Loops.
Some people say lots of things, Peter, and I don't think the BBC has to give voice to all of them.
Matthew, on your point about climate change, should the BBC no longer, therefore, platform Bill Gates, who's come out recently and said that the kind of climate alarmism that the world is going to end because of climate change is wrong and that solutions are within our grasp? I don't think Bill Gates is a Fruit Loop. And this is, I think, the problem of the defenders of the BBC, that they think that their beliefs are so righteous and so obviously objectively true and correct that men can become women or that climate change is the biggest issue that's facing humanity, that they cannot see that they are incapable, therefore, of being impartial, which is what the BBC is supposed to be. And I think, I'm afraid...
Let's let Matthew have a say on all of that.
Well, I mean, I note that Nigel Farage, for it is he, has been having a lot of say on this. He should be thanking the BBC. He's been on Question Time 38 times, if what I researched a few minutes ago is correct. They've platformed him. They've helped build him into the position that he's at the moment, whereas my party, I'm a Lib Dem for my sins, with 72 MPs at the moment, can't seem to get on lots of programmes, despite the fact that pre-coalition, when actually we had far fewer MPs than we do now, we used to be on every single political panel.
Well,
is that fairness? Is that balance?
There's nothing more that we like doing at talkTV than playing a clip of Ed Davey. So we're going to do it right now. This is what Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, said about the BBC yesterday.
The BBC News is the most trusted news source in the world, and we should be really proud of it. It's typical of British values. Of course, there's the odd mistake they make. I have to say, Donald Trump makes many, many more, as does Nigel Farage. And so the fact that Nigel Farage is basically teaming up with President Trump to criticise the BBC is shocking. It's unpatriotic, it's wrong, and it shows that he wants Trump's America, with his attacks on free media, coming to the UK.
Lisa Nadi is on her feet in the House of Commons. I'll come back to Matthew and James, but let's hear from the Culture Secretary in the House of Commons right now.
Intense debate across the media and our nation, and today I want to set out for the House what action is being taken to address the allegations that have been made, the actions this government is taking to support the BBC to address this, and the future of an institution that has been at the centre of our democratic and cultural life for over a century. The House will know that yesterday the chair of the BBC, Samir Shah, wrote to the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. He accepted there had been editorial failings and committed to a number of steps in response. Dr Shah believes that our national broadcaster, which remains one of the most trusted sources of news in our country, has a responsibility to uphold the highest standards. I agree. Over the past week, I've been in regular contact with him and his team to ensure that where these standards have not been met, firm, swift and transparent action follows. I welcome the steps that have already been set out, and I will keep the House updated as the BBC leadership grips these issues. The concerns that have been raised are serious in and of themselves, but some in this House have gone even further, suggesting that the BBC is institutionally biased. It should not be lost on us that the BBC has faced criticism from all sides for its coverage of highly contentious and contested issues, and accused of giving too much airtime to particular parties and for giving them too little. Those in this House attacking the BBC from left and right for not expressing views they agree with should consider just what is at stake. There is a fundamental difference between raising serious concerns over editorial failings and members of this House launching a sustained attack on the institution itself. Because the BBC is not just a broadcaster, it is a national institution that belongs to us all. Every day it tells the story of who we are, the people, places and communities that make up life across the UK. It projects British values, creativity and integrity to the world. It underpins our creative industries, has a footprint in our nations and regions that is unmatched by any other. And it is by far the most widely used and trusted source of news in the United Kingdom. At a time when the lines are being dangerously blurred between fact and opinion, news and polemic, the BBC stands apart. It is a light on the hill for people here and across the world. Trusted news and high-quality programming is essential to our democratic and cultural life. All of us in this House should value it, uphold it, and fiercely defend it. The BBC is facing challenges, some of its own making, but it is doing so in the context of a revolution in the media landscape that has challenged all broadcasters and polarised and fragmented our national debate. It is time to grip this with a clarity of vision and purpose that secures the BBC's future. Throughout its history, Madam Deputy Speaker, the BBC has always adapted and evolved. This is an institution that began in the era of radio, when it was deemed an existential threat to the newspaper industry. It evolved into the age of mass audiences, ushered in by the invention of television, and it navigated the complexities of reporting during the Second World War. We will imminently begin the Charter Review, which will set the terms of the BBC for the next decade, and through it we will collectively write the next chapter of the BBC's story. Together we will ensure the BBC is sustainably funded, commands the public's trust, and continues to drive growth, good jobs, skills and creativity across every region and nation of the UK. In an era in which trust is fraying and truth is contested across our nation, it will ensure the BBC remains fiercely independent and is genuinely accountable to the public it serves. We will publish a Green Paper and launch a public consultation shortly, and I will set out more detail to the House in the coming weeks. I would like to thank the outgoing Director General for his service and his commitment to public service broadcasting over many years. And I'd like to thank the CEO of News for leading the BBC's news operation through stormy times. I do not underestimate the challenge of taking on these roles and the personal toll that they can take on the individuals who hold them. As we write the next chapter of an institution that has stood at the centre of British public life for a century, our overarching goal is simple: to ensure the BBC can renew its mission for the modern age and continue to inform, educate and entertain, not just for the coming decade, but well into the next century. I commend this statement to the House.
Nigel Huddleston will reply. He's the Shadow Culture Secretary for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Lady for advance notice of her statement. The BBC is in a sorry mess, and sadly one of its own making, that has resulted in the resignations of the Director General and the CEO of News. These recent leadership changes are a response to the growing number of examples of bias in the BBC, one of which has resulted in a potential $1 billion lawsuit. This is why the Leader of the Opposition has said the BBC needs to change and needs saving from itself. Otherwise, we may all pay the price in reputational damage and in our pockets as licence fee payers. We all want the BBC to succeed, to be the best possible version of itself, but that requires institutional change and far more than a few moves at the top. But let me first acknowledge, Madam Deputy Speaker, some of the many good things that the BBC does well in delivering on its principles to inform, educate and entertain, from Strictly and Traitors to world-class natural history programming, sport and local radio, and coverage of major national events, including, of course, the recent remembrance services and events. These are things we can all be proud of, that contribute positively to the BBC's brand and reputation at home and abroad. But the BBC also has a charter obligation for impartiality, and too many examples have come to light exposing bias at the BBC, particularly as it relates to the news and current affairs output. Examples that have often strayed far away from the BBC's own editorial guidelines. The coverage of trans rights, selective push notifications of news, the Gaza documentary, the output of the Arabic news service, reliance on stats provided by Hamas, all speak to bias at the BBC. And at a time when anti-Semitism is rising around the world, the BBC should surely think twice about distributing questionable data from a terrorist organisation bent on the destruction of Israel. We expect better from our national broadcaster. And I'm glad that the BBC chair has admitted an error of judgment relating to the Panorama programme on Donald Trump, which involved editing of his speech to give the impression that he said something that he did not say.
Nigel Huddleston there, the Shadow Culture Secretary. We'll get reaction from James and Matthew in just a few minutes here on Talk. You can get in touch too, 0344 499 1000.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Well, we heard before the break there from the Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy and the Shadow Culture Secretary Nigel Huddleston for the Conservatives. Big thank you to James Price and Matthew Hulbert for your patience today. Guys, I really appreciate that. We weren't expecting that statement just to be quite so early. Matthew and James, let's get a reaction from you to that. I'll start with Matthew and then go to James. Matthew.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I mean, that was quite interesting. I mean, I broadly agreed with everything Lisa Nandy had to say, and I think she's quite right. I think the Tory spokesperson, Nigel Huddleston, decided to play a bit of politics there, and he seemed to like every bit of the BBC, bar the bit that he feels is biased against the Tories. And it goes back to my earlier point that, on both left and right, and I do think it's both, I think they both want the BBC to appear to agree a bit more with them. And I think that probably means that by and large, the BBC in its news reporting is in the right place.
I disagree with that. I think it has to be impartial. It can't be on anybody's side. James?
I mean, that kind of logic is if someone says to you that 2 + 2 = 4, someone else says 2 + 2 = 6, and the smart thing is to agree that 2 + 2 probably = 5. But look, I think the heart of all of this is that treating the BBC like it's this hallowed, wonderful thing, and that, as Ed Davey, your party leader, said, it's unpatriotic to criticise it. This is the same inability to have constructive criticism of a British institution as we've had for decades now with the NHS. And all this kind of pathetic and sort of faux flag-waving behaviour serves to do is to prevent these institutions from improving. The BBC has been caught out bang to rights, not only making big editorial mistakes, but then trying to brush it under the cupboard and the carpet, which we would not have known about had this report have come out. Right? That is the fundamental point.
More trusted than the Conservatives will ever be.
Trust has been... You can shout over me if you want. Trust has been eroded in the BBC, and instead of them taking the proper level of responsibility and saying, you know what, we should really look into this report, they've sent out people to say, oh, we're still the most trusted people in the world. Well, maybe not after this report has come out.
And Matthew, James is right, isn't it? Because, yeah, they're not going to be as trusted as the Conservative Party, but you would expect a national broadcaster that has a commitment in its charter to impartiality to be more trusted than any political party, would you not, Matthew?
It makes mistakes. All human institutions do and will.
And that's right, Matthew. But the problem is that this was more than a mistake. This was a doctoring, this was a botched job, and we have that in this same report saying that, suggesting, and it was buried, that the reporting of the American election was more anti-Trump and more pro-Harris. It should have been straight down the line. It should have been one side and the other, the whole thing represented properly.
And then that report was covered up, right? What do we think about that?
Matthew?
And two heads have rolled, two very senior heads, in fact, the most senior head has rolled at the BBC as a result. But the BBC will be around when the Tories have long since ceased to be.
I think both of them...
That's why this is a party political point. The BBC made mistakes and people are defending it when they should be saying, yes, it needs to improve. It's as simple as that.
Gentlemen, thank you both very much, and thank you for your patience during that statement as well. I appreciate it. From both of you, Matthew Hulbert, their political commentator, and James Price, former Conservative Special Advisor. What do you think about this? 0344 499 1000. Stephen's in Cambridgeshire. He's given me a ring on that number. You're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say, Stephen?
Hello, Peter.
Hi there.
Matthew Hulbert. I think he's got a slightly biased view himself.
Well, he is a Liberal Democrat. He is a political commentator, and James is from the Conservatives. So, listen, we all have our perspectives, Stephen.
Yeah, but he's saying that Farage has been on Question Time X amount of times. The only reason Farage was put on Question Time is so the left could shoot him down.
And many people feel that. We had someone messaging us earlier saying the audiences in Question Time he feels are biased anyway. Is Nigel Farage overexposed in the BBC, do you think, Stephen?
No, but I used to watch Question Time when Dimbleby used to do it, and it was a totally different programme.
I worked on Question Time when Dimbleby did it. I still, to this day, have no idea what his personal politics are.
No, it was a professional programme. You could watch it, and he'd interject when it got sort of too, one way or the other, and he'd keep it, let everybody make their points.
Do you trust the BBC now, Stephen?
No, mate. I haven't for the last 20 years.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, Stephen, Sorry, finish your point there, Stephen.
But I mean, Matthew gave himself away when he said, "Oh, about trans rights and all this." He's given himself away with his point of view on that.
He's entitled to his point of view, certainly, and we're the home of free speech, and we'll let him expand on that, as we did with you, Stephen. Great to hear from you, Stephen, in Cambridgeshire. Thank you for that. 0344 499 1000. Get yourself on the air between now and 7 o'clock. A slightly different story next. This is a letter to the Times from former senior military officers attacking Starmer and human rights laws. This all ties in to the prosecution of soldiers. General Sir Chris Deverill, who's the former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command, is going to be with me in just a second. It's really interesting what these people have put pen to paper, this joint letter to the Times. Very, very interesting story, and really asks the question, as it does in the letter, about whether people have the people in our armed services, the brave men and women who protect us every day, have they got the enemy in front of them but lawyers behind them watching over every single thing they do? Can we back them up? Are we backing them up in years to come as well? Big issue with General Sir Chris Deverill coming up next. Want your thoughts on it too? 0344 499 1000. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thank you to Terry in Birmingham. He says, Peter, at least talk allows people from both sides equally. Farage and Question Time would be outnumbered 5-1, never mind the hand-picked lefty audience, says Terry in Birmingham. Tad's been in touch and says, I look at the left-leaning BBC and I'm reminded the only way such entities exist is by edict, some other undemocratic device, or by overthrow. The left to earn its place in an open, unrigged market. The BBC would soon wither away in spite of what Lisa Nandy says to the contrary, and not before time, says Tad. Let's talk about something else now. This is a really interesting story. The Army's most senior former officers have accused the Prime Minister of allowing human rights law to creep in and undermine the effectiveness of Britain's armed forces. It is, of course, Armistice Day today. I've got my poppy on, as so many other people do. Like so many people, of course, I stood and waited and observed that 2-minute silence at 11 o'clock today, as we did on my programme on Sunday, on Remembrance Sunday. This is interesting because the letter goes as far as branding the depth of the trust erosion as a direct threat to national security. Talks about an exodus from the special forces, from some people who've gone through, incredible levels of training to be special forces soldiers. They allege ministers have inaccurately tried to deny that people are leaving the special forces because of the lawfare. In the letter they write, today every British soldier deployed must consider not only the enemy in front of them, but the lawyer behind them. Make no mistake, our closest allies are watching uneasily and our enemies will be rubbing their hands. Well, General Sir Chris Deverell, who's the former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command, joins me now. General Sir Chris, thank you for your time this tea time. Why have you decided to put your name to this letter?
Well, I think the key thing is that we're worried about in the first instance is the repeal of the previous Legacy Act and its replacement with this Troubles Bill will return us to a situation in which ageing veterans can be taken to court for events that happened decades ago in Northern Ireland, and that had been stopped by the previous Legacy Act, but can now happen again under this new act. And even though the chance of a successful prosecution against said veterans is in practice very low, it is deeply depressing, inhumane, really, and potentially costly for them to have to go through these processes, which often take years.
Soldier F's trial, of course, he was found not guilty on all charges. I wonder, from your perspective, how, I mean, there were 300,000 people who served in uniform in the Troubles in Northern Ireland during Operation Banner. The peace process would not have happened were it not for the great bravery and distinction of the vast majority of people who served in that uniform. I grew up in a safe country because of the Belfast Agreement, which was signed when I was 13. That was in part due to the efforts and huge bravery of many people in uniform. My question is, what happens when people fell below that standard that you held, and I'm sure the vast majority of people under your command held? If they fall below that standard, what should happen? Should there be redress?
Well, certainly, we are not asking for immunity for soldiers from the law. It's really important that soldiers are held to the legal standards that apply at the time. The risk, though, and there's definitely a concern amongst veterans on this point, is that people today are being held to different standards than were in place at the time when they were serving in Northern Ireland. And that is a concern that I and my fellow general officers are giving voice to.
Clearly this is not just about Northern Ireland, although that's a major part of it because of these prosecutions that have happened previously, but also wars which have happened more recently, Iraq, Afghanistan. And you talk about the soldiers today. Every British soldier deployed must consider not only the enemy in front of them, but the lawyer behind them. What effect is that having on servicemen and women right now as they attempt to do their jobs? Because often they've got to react very, very quickly, make split-second decisions to keep them and our country safe.
Well, I've definitely had conversations with people currently serving who worry about whether they might be taken to court later for actions that when they took them were fully within the law, and the risks are twofold, really. The first is that people hesitate on operations. They worry before they take some action that what is the consequence for them legally of taking that action. That puts them at risk if the action they were about to take would have been perfectly legal. And the other risk is that if people if there becomes a general climate of this concern about whether the government will stand behind our people, then people will leave the armed forces. And anecdotally, that's already happening in the special forces. And the special forces are at the tip of the spear. They're the people most likely to be used on military operations. So it's particularly worrying. Even small numbers of people leaving the special forces because of this fear is a concern.
And it's certainly highly significant. That has been, you claim ministers have inaccurately tried to deny this. What about the role of the government in all of this, not just in regard to the legislation, but in backing up the soldiers and backing up the army? Because clearly you don't feel that's happening at the moment.
Well, I don't think it helps when for example, the Veterans Minister of all people can't rule out a paramilitary being on the Legacy Commission. The government subsequently clarified that, and that's great, but it doesn't really give confidence that the government's heart is in the right place. We need to be confident that provided we operate within the guidelines given at the time of an operation, that we will not face prosecution decades later under a different set of legal rules.
I mean, a point of I'm not a lawyer, but a point of British law is essentially that you shouldn't retrospectively be prosecuted because the law can change. Obviously, it should be the law at the time, but clearly this is a real worry for you in regard to this legislation going through.
It is. I mean, when you look at the European Convention of Human Rights, it has a rule set that's very different from the law of armed conflict, under which we normally operate on operations. Not, of course, in Northern Ireland, but when we operate abroad. And the risk is that we be held to the European Convention of Human Rights, which has different standards. For example, under that convention, you can't use force against somebody other than in the circumstances where there is an imminent threat to life. Whereas under the law of armed conflict, you can legitimately target enemy combatants, even if they don't pose an imminent threat to life. And so these are different standards in the application of military activity, military force. And the fear is that people will be held to the wrong standards later in court.
What do you think the impact of this letter will be?
Well, I hope it gives the government pause for thought. You know, that's what its intention was. We would like to see the government really knuckle down and give the maximum possible attention to the interests of veterans and of future servicemen and women. You know, and we're not convinced that that's happened yet.
I'm going to read out a 3-paragraph statement from the government to give them their right of the reply. I'd like your response to that in just a second, if you just bear with me for a second. This is a government spokesman saying, "We promised our veterans who served with honour in Northern Ireland that we would put proper protections in place, and the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill delivers on that commitment. After the false promises of the last government, we are putting in place six real workable protections for veterans that the failed Legacy Act never did. We will not allow the process, like so many times before, to become the punishment for our veterans. These robust safeguards will ensure the rights of those who serve their nation so honourably are protected, while providing victims with a human rights compliant, fair and transparent system to seek answers." What do you make of what the MOD has said there?
Well, I'm not saying that those are worthless, but what I would say is that they won't prevent prosecutions starting again against ageing servicemen and women. You know, they will not stop that at all. And the second thing is that those protections, on the face of it, seem to be equally applicable to the terrorists. And that doesn't seem right. You know, there has to be a moral difference between the servants of the state and those who seek to destroy it.
General Sir Chris Deverill, thank you for joining me today on Talk. He is the former commander of the UK's Joint Forces Command. Very, very interesting. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to react to what Sir Chris was saying there. David in Exeter is on the line and has some thoughts. David, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Thank you very much. Well done to all those senior officers who've intervened with this. This is a campaign that I've been involved with for quite some time, going back to the late Dennis Hutchins. And I've got to say that the crucial thing that we found in that campaign, and this is obviously, we've got an argument here with the law, not just the lawfare in general, but then the legal opinions between the current administration and the previous one.
Yeah.
So the context of Dennis's case is quite crucial, because this is where my involvement with former special services came to light as well, where at the time Dennis was arrested for something that he was alleged to do back in the early 1970s on Op Banner.
Oh, I should say, just for people who aren't as familiar as you and I are, David, Operation Banner was the campaign that the UK Army had in Northern Ireland throughout the Troubles.
Yeah. So initially, Dennis was, I'm going to say, tricked into talking to the MOD with a reconciliation gambit. So this is going back to 2018, 19, 20. And he was, over a long period, then sort of, there was what was supposed to be laissez-faire conversations, but actually what was happening, it was forming the basis of the engagement to then engage the lawfare. And to cut a dreadful and protracted story short, we discover in that period that we were thinking that there were about a dozen cases of these Northern Ireland veterans that were being pursued. Bearing in mind, Dennis had got a letter from the MOD saying at the time of the incident in question that he had no case to answer. And yet he was still taken back to Northern Ireland by a series of PSNI, Police Northern Ireland, come and arrested him.
I remember that.
In Plymouth. He was 74 years old. He was suffering from stage 4 liver cancer. And he ended up, ping-ponging in and out of court. I did a lot of PR and the campaigning for him, along with General Lord Dannett, lots of other senior officers, some of which are pending to that letter now. But what we found critically during that campaign was that Special Forces veterans were also being vexatiously pursued, and they were using the same tactics to get at those SF vets. Now, obviously, we had the bill come in under the Conservative administration now that Labour want to change it, and those officers are saying that they're not happy and they need to be listened to, because this is, make no bones about it, as it said in the letter, a direct threat to national security. And this is the crucial bit. This cannot be news to the government, because General David Petraeus came over to the UK and offered to intervene to help fix this, because it was interfering with recruitment, retention, morale, fighting capability, and the future ability of British military, and let's say SF, and Deborah was very correct to highlight that, because it's the rump, the spear of our military. And these lawfare cases will culminate in the rump of our military, the SF, being pursued.
Do you think... Sorry, I've just got to go to a break in a second, David, but just finally, do you think...
I'm going to conclude.
Go ahead.
What said is crucial, is that the UK and the US would no longer be able to fight together at the front line, and the UK would be retrograded to be in the back of the theatre or the conflict, targeting rather than actually being in a situation of armed conflict, because the lawfare and the over-expansive interpretation of the ECHR was so bad, it was knobbling us. And that's the crucial thing.
Do you think the government will listen to this, David, just in a word?
They have to listen to these officers. It is crucial, because we are in the context of war, and as General Bowens has said, who's just conducted the defence review, our adversaries are doing everything to us at the moment other than the shooting.
Yeah. Okay, David, we've got to leave it there, but really fascinating to talk to you. Thank you. We also heard from General Sir Chris Deverell. If you have views on this, 0344 499 1000. We'll take a break. I'll take more calls about all the issues we're talking about today. Stay with us here on Talk.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Very good point from Nick in York. Nick, I don't understand this point either. How can it be that soldiers can be prosecuted retrospectively under different laws to those held on the day, but Chinese spy prosecution fell apart as the law on the day was used as an excuse not to take the case forward? Just interested to understand, Nick. I don't understand that, so I'm afraid I can't actually explain it to you, but I appreciate that. Debbie says Churchill went virtually to the front lines. I think maybe an idea for our current Prime Minister to visit closer to the fighting and feel the fear himself. Debbie in Lincolnshire has been in touch, 0344 499 1000 to comment on this. Debbie, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
I'm ex-serving. My husband's still serving. What concerns me is if we were going to get prosecuted, years going forward for stuff that we were told that we had to follow. Because when you're in the military, you have to follow direct orders. Yes, okay, I used to question stuff and get told you're not paid to think. But you do have to follow direct orders. So I do think this is really harsh and really unfair, personally.
And no doubt it would be running through the minds of those who are still serving. I know you know many of them, as you're saying with your background there. Have they spoken to you about this? Are they saying, I'm worried about being prosecuted for things I might be instructed to do by senior officers?
I think 100%, because you can't question an officer. I mean, I'm married to one, but I wasn't an officer. I was a soldier, and when the officer says jump, you say how high. So you do it, but there does come a bit of integrity into it where you go, really, I question this, maybe, but that's not how the army, well, I'm army, so that's not how the army condition you.
Mm-hmm.
That you are there to follow a direct order. So I do think it's incredibly unfair if you are going to get, this dragged up 30, 40, 50 years later. It must be incredibly heartbreaking.
Is it right, in your opinion, that there could be prosecutions if people do fall below the standards, though, if they do break the law?
I do think you need to bring a level of integrity. I mean, we're all human beings and we can think for ourselves. So I would question, and I did, that maybe, are you sure this is right? But then we do go back to what we're conditioned to do, that you do have to follow your chain of commands. And if they say this is what you need to do, you do it. I was very lucky. I worked for a chap called Phil Abbott. He was amazing, and he would never put us in a difficult situation. So, yeah, you do have a lot of trust in them, which is why they're your officers. But I do think it's unfair if the system is now going to drag it up 50 whatever years later and basically say, now you're liable. I think that's completely unfair.
Debbie, thanks for your thoughts on that. That's Debbie in Lincolnshire there. Let's speak to Caroline in London, who's got in touch on Bob Vylan. This is Pascal Robinson Foster, the Bob Vylan singer, I use the term loosely, who is now being interviewed under caution by Avon and Somerset Police. Caroline, what do you think?
Hi.
Hi there.
I'd really love to make a couple of points, if I may. The first point is, yes, this human being, I don't even want to mention his name. There's actually posters outside Kentish Town tonight where he's performing in Keir Starmer's constituency. Posters saying, we want Kentish Town to be a Zionist-free zone.
It's disgraceful.
and they're still there. So I could phone talk 24/7 with different things. I can listen to all of you 24/7. We're not getting anywhere. We've got an MP called Ismail Mohammed, an independent MP in Birmingham, on TikTok saying we're going to take over Birmingham, we're going to take over Westminster.
Yeah, I've seen that clip.
Right. Where do we go with this? You know, what the hell? And then we've got soldiers who fought for this country who might go to prison. You have a woman standing in a bus stop waiting for a bus being stabbed 23 times. I mean, what this... I just want to know what we're going to do, because we can talk and talk and talk, and then you've got Ed Davey. I think he's mentally deranged.
Okay, I'm sure. Look, you're, you know, with the greatest respect, neither of us is a medical professional, but clearly you disagree with them, Caroline.
I disagree. Blaming Trump for BBC. I mean, it's insanity.
Yeah.
The BBC is corrupt to its core, and I hope he sues them for trillions. I want the BBC gone. I'm sorry, it's a disgrace.
Well, we'll see where we are with
this. You know, Bob Dylan did what he did. It was hate speech, and he's doing it again and again. Why has it taken the CPS so long? It's obvious.
Yeah, well, we're asking that question. We're continuing to ask that question. Caroline, thank you. 135 days on Bob Dylan. Lots to discuss in the next hour. We'll talk more about the BBC. Charles Moore is coming on. Lord Moore, the former editor of the Daily Telegraph and Spectator. We'll talk to him. We'll also find out what on earth is happening in our prisons and indeed in the Sun tomorrow. And as promised, those couple of letters I've received, lots of texts and phone calls and so on, but I've got a couple of letters as well. I'm going to read out just a little bit from Alan's letter and indeed from Mary's letter as well in the next hour, because you can communicate in all sorts of different ways. The most effective one is to pick up the phone 0344 499 1000, just like Debbie and indeed Caroline did. Stay with us.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Hello, it's just gone 6 o'clock. This is Talk Drive. I'm Peter Cardwell. Thank you so much for your company this Tuesday evening. Lots to discuss, including the ongoing crisis at the BBC. In fact, in the Commons in the last hour, Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, and the Shadow Culture Secretary, and many other people as well, have been going at it, asking what the future of the organisation is. We'll talk to Charles Moore, Lord Moore, in a second, former editor of the Daily Telegraph and Spectator. We'll also reflect on what Tim Davie has been saying. We'll talk about the crisis in our prisons. 91 people have been mistakenly released between April and October. David Lammy's been answering questions in Parliament as well. We'll find out what's in the Sun tomorrow, and lots of other perspectives are coming your way too. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. You can text me 87222 with the word talk in your text. You can tweet me at talkTV. Follow me at Peter Cardwell. You can send me a WhatsApp text message. You can give me send me a WhatsApp voice message, less than a minute please, or give me a ring, all on the main number 0344 499 1000. Plenty to discuss between now and 7 o'clock when Kevin O'Sullivan takes over in this chair. Do give me a shout and make your voice heard here on Talk Drive. Just before we talked about the BBC, thank you to Rotten Lass, who has tweeted me about the WASPy women. This is, it's not about compensation necessarily, but the government is reconsidering the decision. Certainly, I would imagine that'll be a story in the Sun tomorrow. We'll maybe talk about that a bit later this hour, but certainly the government and the Work and Pension Secretary, Pat McFadden, are reconsidering that because all the evidence, they say, wasn't considered at the time. It'll be very interesting to see what happens there. Certainly it's been the Labour Party's position for a long time to reconsider that, so now they're finally getting around to it. The BBC is the big story today still. The Chief Executive of News, Deborah Turness, and the Director General have resigned. They're still there though, they haven't left just yet. The outgoing Director General, Tim Davie, spoke about the crisis earlier today.
We are a unique and precious organisation, and I see the free press, I see the weapon under pressure, I see the weaponisation. I think we've got to fight for our journalism. I'm really proud of our work, and the amazing work locally, globally that we're doing is utterly precious. We have made some mistakes that have cost us, but we need to fight for that. And I'm fiercely proud of that. And don't let anyone stop you thinking that we are doing a fantastic job.
Tim Davie there, the outgoing Director General of the BBC. In the last hour, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has been speaking in the House of Commons.
We will imminently begin the Charter Review, which will set the terms of the BBC for the next decade, and through it we will collectively write the next chapter of the BBC's story. Together we will ensure the BBC is sustainably funded, commands the public's trust, and continues to drive growth, good jobs, skills and creativity across every region and nation of the UK. In an era in which trust is fraying and truth is contested across our nation, it will ensure the BBC remains fiercely independent and is genuinely accountable to the public it serves.
Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary. I want to speak now to Lord Moore, Charles Moore, who's the former editor of the Daily Telegraph and Spectator, and indeed was a lone voice in the media for many years, talking about the problems with the TV licence, not having a TV licence, and a big critic of the BBC for many, many years. I've read your columns and your books, Lord Moore, and I wonder what you make of Tim Davie when he says this is a weaponisation and they've got to fight for their journalism. What do you make of that, Charles?
Well, thank you, Peter. I think that they should fight for their journalism, but it's the journalism weakness that has been exposed by the Prescott internal memorandum. So, if the best way to fight for the journalism, which I believe Tim Davie sincerely wants, is to return to impartiality, and what the Prescott memo shows is a systemic failure to do that. It is systemic. It's not, quote, mistakes. It's in many areas getting it wrong because of bias. And they're very important areas. They're to do with trans issues, they're to do with immigration issues, they're to do with the misrepresentation of Donald Trump, and above all, the extraordinary behaviour of the BBC in relation to the Israel-Gaza question. And by the way, there are lots of other issues that BBC has failed to fulfil its values, which are not mentioned in the memo, but such as the coverage of Brexit, for example, or Black Lives Matter, I mean, or climate change, lots and lots of things. And so I think the BBC is failing to respond to what's happened. They're sort of blaming an exterior force of a dark kind, which they can't really describe, but they have in front of them evidence which they themselves commissioned about why they're getting it wrong, and they don't admit that they're getting it wrong, or rather, they admit it as individual mistakes, but they refuse absolutely to look at the overall problem.
Tell us your thoughts on the overall problem and why that is occurring. Is it because of a metropolitan elite, a groupthink in the BBC? What is your view on why these things are happening?
Well, I think there are two things, really. The first and most important, perhaps, is that there is a systemic bias, which is a metropolitan left-wing one, which therefore takes a series of views on many of these important subjects I've mentioned. These views are not in themselves wicked or discreditable, but no, the BBC, with its commitment to impartiality, should not be taking them. It should be reporting. And I think the related problem that the BBC has is that it's always looking for what its executives call compelling television and a compelling story. And that, of course, it's good for as a journalist. I know very well that when a story is compelling, that's a good thing, but an exciting thing. But the BBC has to tell the news as it is, not how to soup it up in the most exciting way, and therefore start monkeying with facts. And I think it's actually rather decadent and sort of inward-looking, and it's not serving the viewers and listeners, because the key point about all of this is that we have to pay. If you own a television in this country, you have to pay a television license, and that's what plays the BBC television, online, and radio. And we who don't like being given all these views are not being properly served, and this is not acknowledged by the BBC.
From the government's perspective, we had Lisa Nandy there, the Culture Secretary, talking about the process of the renewal of the Royal Charter of the BBC. If they can't be trusted, and trust is a key element in all of this, of course, to stick to the impartiality now, how much harsher, or how can impartiality be guaranteed? Can it be guaranteed? Should it be guaranteed in the next Royal Charter? Or should we abolish the licence fee and actually say, you know, if you want to be a left-wing organisation and you want to put out left-wing views, go ahead and do it with a subscription model or something like that? What would your pathway forward be?
Well, like a lot of people, I'm a bit conflicted about this, because I value the BBC traditions, but I think they are betraying their traditions, and I think that the licence fee is likely to die anyway, because it's so easy nowadays to watch television without watching the BBC, or without even having a television. And, you know, you hardly ever meet a person under 30 who has a television licence. So the revenue is falling. Yeah. And maybe it would have to go to a subscription. Well, anyway, but I do agree with BBC traditionists that there are a lot of good things about the BBC, and my plea is always that the only way you can survive is if you get back to them instead of pretending that there isn't a problem. And by the way, I think this sort of indecision will continue, because I think the present government wants to be on the side of the BBC for political reasons. After all, the views that the BBC puts forward are much closer to Labour than to other parties, and therefore will sort of temporise and not really make decisions about this, and will renew the charter without particular useful guarantees. And I'm afraid this scandal, which the Prescott internal memo has revealed, was predictable and predicted and described. And you kindly mentioned the fact that I've written about this for quite a while, longer than I care to remember. And they will never admit it. This is the most extraordinary feature of it. Never. Who should be the new Director General? If you really want to change the BBC, who should lead it? Well, I don't know. But I think it has to be, to use the phrase that people use in the city, the problem has to be kitchen sinked. The first thing you have to do when you're in a very bad pickle is admit what's wrong instead of pretending it isn't wrong. And therefore it's got to be a pretty brave person, because he's going to be up against, articulate and self-righteous BBC panjandrams who will think that their freedom is being attacked. In fact, the proper reforms would expand their freedom to do proper news rather than propaganda.
Charles, thank you. That's Lord Moore, the former editor of the Daily Telegraph and the Spectator. Malcolm Clark is with us too, science documentary maker, and has a Substack on gender issues as well. Malcolm, really interesting to hear your perspective. What do you make of what Charles Moore was saying there?
I think Charles is absolutely right. What he was being too polite, I think, about the BBC, because I think what's happened is all those woke attitudes that he mentioned, whether it's on Israel, whether it's on trans issues, or hatred for Donald Trump, have all been grafted on in the last decade to what was a traditional BBC arrogance. I mean, when I worked at the BBC 25 years ago and on until about, maybe 20 years ago, you could feel the arrogance. Ordinary BBC staff believed, as they did under Lord Reith, that they are a cut above everybody else, that they look down on ITV as commercial television. Lord Reith hated the idea of television itself. He thought it was going to be a social disaster, or threatened to be. And so they always had this arrogance that they were better, that they were the right people to tell the public what to think. And to, as Lord Reith said, people don't know what they really want. We have to tell them what they want. And the problem is, if you take that traditional arrogance and then you put these woke attitudes, which are out of sync with the British public, you end up with a crisis that we're in the middle of.
And one major aspect of that crisis is the issue that you write about, which is the trans issue. And there's evidence in Michael Prescott's report that the LGBT unit within the BBC was trying to suppress different organisations that were critical of trans rights, the trans arguments, however you want to put it. What's your view on that?
Oh, there's absolutely no doubt. This is what's so annoying about the defenders of the BBC this week, like David Aronovich and Alistair Campbell, all these other people are saying, and even Tim Davie when he resigned, saying there's no systemic bias. It absolutely is systemic bias. Michael Prescott had a huge long list of particular examples.
19 pages, yeah.
Well, in the trans thing, maybe it was about 12 or 14 examples, very specific, which together added up to a systemic bias. But now everyone's saying, oh, no, there's not a systemic bias. It's interesting that today, about a few hours ago, was the very first time that the BBC News has mentioned the Darlington nurses. There was 8 nurses that were forced to share a changing room with a trans-identified bloke who thinks he's a woman. That's the very, very first time this case, which is really crucial. Wes Streeting, Labour Health Secretary, met with these nurses. So even the Labour Party thinks that they've got a serious case, and he and Wes Streeting has said that their case was serious, and yet the BBC hasn't covered it because they have a filter. The LGBTQ Pride group, their staff group, plus all the LGBTQ organisations that constantly are in there advising them, doing diversity training. All they're doing is filtering the editorial of the BBC. They make journalists fearful of saying the wrong thing. And it's only because of this crisis, you can see that the managers at the BBC are obviously all distracted, that finally some brave journalists at the BBC have A, mentioned the Darlington nurses, and B, they've referred to this trans-identified bloke as a biological male who identifies as a woman. That is the first time I can remember the BBC using factually accurate language.
So perhaps seeds of change? Perhaps seeds of change? Do you think Absolutely. This is perhaps in reaction to what has happened in the last few days?
There are thousands of good journalists, good staff within the BBC who are all, every class, every background. They're all, they're not an alien race. Unfortunately, management and the culture it created meant that they felt they could not tell truth to the public. And that's why all these defenders who are just saying there's no problem, they're not doing the BBC a favour. They're actually harming the BBC, because when they say that they don't think there's a systemic bias, when Tim Davie says there's no systemic bias, what he's proving is he can't see the bias. The bias is so deep within the management culture that they don't even notice it. Somebody compared it to a fish swimming in water doesn't realize it's swimming in water. They are swimming in this woke culture, which is entirely out of touch with the ordinary British public, and the journalists there need the chance to start doing their job properly.
Malcolm, thank you. Good to talk to you. Malcolm Clark there, science documentary maker, and he has a Substack on gender issues which you can check out as well. Thanks for joining us there. Paul says, people saying the BBC is right-wing are gaslighting us. They say it's right-wing to deflect. Martin in Lichfield says the BBC is not fit for purpose anymore. Its function as an unbiased media outlet is over. Nandi is part of the delusional narrative along with Davy and Starmer that simply don't get it. Numerous accounts of bias to the left and blatant mistruths are there to see it if you want to see it. It's a blob London-centric thing. It's only fit for a subscription service, then see what output it delivers. I think it'll change and appeal to a wider audience or fail. Simon says, good evening, Cardi P. Did Nandi really just thank the CEO of News, and she says that people trust the BBC for news like the rest of her failing party. She just isn't listening to a good proportion of the everyday people, says Simon in Canterbury. Dave in Cardiff says the BBC has very good qualities that are often overlooked. The BBC orchestras and proms bring us some of the best quality music. Such great work must be acknowledged. It's not all about news. Dave, I agree with you. There are loads of things about the BBC I really like. My favourite programme on Radio 4, for example, is Last Word, a brilliant obituary series. Really good. I love The Traitors. I watch The Apprentice. I listen to the BBC every day. But it doesn't mean, of course, and I know you're not making this argument, that it's news or indeed a lot of things that are happening and that it's broadcasting are not below the standard that they should be and not impartial. Perhaps David can discuss the post office scandal at some point. Have the BBC had a chat to him about that, says Jane. And Stuart says the majority of British people are sick to death of the BBC and their left-wing BS, full stop. We want rid of it. Bye-bye BBC, says Stuart. Lots more to discuss between now and 7 o'clock. Get your call in 0344 499 1000.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile. The home of common sense. This is Talk.
Sean in Bridlington says, isn't it telling that everyone defending the BBC is a lefty? Nicola in Norfolk says, that clip of Tim Davie shows the depth of the problem. The arrogance is staggering. Also, I see he says they've got to fight for their journalism. Is that an incitement to violence, given how they portrayed Trump's similar words? I don't think so, Nicola, but perhaps you got your tongue in your cheek there. Another person says, I think Davie should try using better language than fight. So far, that word's got them in trouble. Dawn says, Peter, it does annoy me when organisations take an enormous amount of time to make decisions. Dawn's referring to the 135 days that Avon and Somerset Police have taken before they interview Pascal Robinson Foster about him shouting death, death, the IDF at Glastonbury. Dawn continues, the CPS could advise the police over the phone in 10 minutes. The police are delaying the Bob Villan case, in Dawn's opinion. And Elisa, who is currently in beautiful Israel, but she's from this country, she's a former police officer, and says, if Pascal Robinson Foster chants those anti-Semitic chants tonight, will the Met grow a backbone and nick him? They certainly would have done in my day. Well, speaking of crime and justice issues, earlier the Justice Secretary, David Lammy, or Deputy Prime Minister, as we have to call him, of course, he insists that his officials do that. He took questions from a shadow counterpart, the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. We'll play that in just a second, but of course this very, very big issue of prisoners being released, 91 prisoners freed in error over the past 7 months. Well, that is a huge issue, and we'll just see what happened in the Commons a little bit earlier. This is David Lammy and Robert Jenrick.
So it's a simple question. Will the Justice Secretary rule out any more early release schemes for prisoners?
Just before the general election in July, his government had 3 different versions of their early release scheme, and we inherited a situation, and he knows this, where prison capacity was completely unsustainable, and successive Justice Secretary under his previous government have said that in the last week. We brought forward our early release scheme. It was important to do that, to put capacity into the system, but it's the sentencing bill that will begin to deal with this issue in a comprehensive way.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if you strip all that waffle back, he didn't deny it, did he?
Isn't it interesting how David Lammy is trying to speak slowly and in a very calm way, unlike his incredibly, I would argue, out of control anger, actually, at Prime Minister's Questions last week. Prime Minister's Questions, of course, 12 o'clock tomorrow. I'll be on with Julia dissecting that. Never Hear Keir is actually making a rare visit to the UK, and we'll be doing Prime Minister's Questions tomorrow against Kemi Badenoch. Well, in the meantime, Mark Hammersley is a retired prison governor and is with me now. Mark, 91 prisoners freed in error between April and October. Does that surprise you?
Evening, Peter. No, it doesn't. It doesn't surprise me at all, unfortunately. It is a continuation of the theme that we have. I think it will help. It might help a little bit if I just clarify just a little bit what release in error is.
Sure, go ahead.
For the listener as well. A release in error, when you release a prisoner too early or when you release a prisoner too late, both of those instances count as a release in error.
And they can also, if you keep them in too long, they can get compensation for that, can't they? So if you screw it up and keep them even a day or two too long, they get a certain amount of money per day, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And in relation to the prisoners that are in too late, sometimes when a prisoner comes back, because the calculation to work out a sentence of a court hearing of a warrant is extremely complicated. When a prisoner does come back from court to a prison and they have to work out the release dates to see what their release dates are, whether they should be released or not, or how long to serve, etc. Sometimes they don't get back to the prison till late in the afternoon or later. Sometimes because the prisons are so full, they might not go to the nearest prison to the court. Sometimes they can get transferred to one a bit further away where there is a space. And so out of those, a large number of those that are released in errors, I would suggest, are ones that are released late rather than released early. So I think that's important just to realise.
I mean, that's fascinating in itself, Mark, and thank you for bringing that expert analysis to us. I mean, we're spending money and giving people compensation for releasing them too late, aren't we? So it's really complicated. You very kindly, and Vanessa Frake as well, another former governor, have outlined to me the complication of the system in depth previously. Do you think this money that David Lammy is going to put into AI and put into a digital system is actually going to simplify it, make it easier for officers to release people at the right time? Because you would imagine that would be, I mean, that is a fundamental part of prisons. You've got to hold people for, yes, the length of their sentence, but not too short and not too long, and certainly don't release them when they're meant to be deported.
No, 100%. The fact that the sentence calculation to work out what dates a prisoner should be released is so complicated. We need an expert in the prison who's highly trained, and they're not prison officers. They're administrative staff who are not paid a high wage. It's an admin task. It's a mathematical equation. But the various release schemes that there are, and there are a lot of them, and the various different ways prisoners' dates are calculated, all of them are very complicated sentences. Many prisoners have sentences running at similar times, and they have dates of different sentences all time. Some sentences qualify for early release, some don't, and I think that that it is so complicated. But one other thing I just mentioned in relation to the release in errors. So apart from a large number of them being ones that are not released early, they're released late. It's just still counted as a release in error. Many of the release in errors don't become apparent until the next time. So as an example, when a prisoner releases a prisoner, you do all your checks and you do all your calculations and you let them out the prison. And as far as everybody thinks you're doing everything right. The prisoner thinks his dates are right. The staff think his dates are right. You've done all the checks. You've let him out. His solicitor thinks the dates are correct. The family, and he's out and he's released. When most prisoners who are released get released on licence, we've got the release scheme at the minute where they get released after 40%, some after 50%, some after parole even later. There's not many that go all the way to the end of sentence. Most prisoners are on licence, and sadly, many prisoners get recalled on licence because they don't comply with their conditions or they commit further crimes, so they come back into prison. And when they do that, they may come back to the same prison, or they may come back to any prison where they come in and they get another court date and dates worked out. So often you get new people and often a new prison working out the new release dates for a prisoner. Now he's come back in, what's his new crime, what's his this, and they revisit the old warrant and the old sentences, and often a release in error is found when a prisoner's back in custody. So it's not, although it is a release in error, it's the administrative release in error. The prisoner's not, the police don't have to look for him. He's back in custody already. So out of those 91, for instance, when you hear on the news there's only the police are looking for 4 released, it's because many of them already in custody, and also many of them were held too long, not too late.
That is mind-blowingly complicated and an awful lot for the Ministry of Justice and the Prison Service to get to grips with. Mark, thank you for explaining that to us. I really appreciate your contribution to the programme. Mark, actually, believe it or not, Mark wrote us a letter. Mark said, I am a prison governor. I've now retired. I know a bit about prisons. Do you want to get me on the air sometime? And we gave him a ring, gave him a chance. He can speak really well, as you can see there, and we've had him on a number of times. And it is just brilliant that he did that. I love when people get in contact. And I actually just want to very briefly read out a couple of just portions, not the whole lot, of a couple of letters that have come in. Now, we get loads of text messages, phone calls, and we'll get to more of those, of course, by 7 o'clock. But I was really moved, actually, by what Mary in Coventry, she wrote me a little card here, and she said it was very quiet. Talking about one day she was out and about, and she says it was very quiet in my bank, so I took the opportunity to make an inquiry. The girls are lovely there. The doors flew open, a young man started shouting, arms swinging, ready to fight. Then he eventually left. This isn't a one-off event. It's so sad. I'm too old to leave this country and this great city of Coventry. But that's Mary just talking about her life and how she lives. And another letter, actually, that we received from Anne, who says she'll be 80 next year. She lives in Stoke, talking about the Prime Minister, saying she's not happy with him. She says Prime Minister at number 10 is about as useful as an ashtray on a motorbike. She's talking about a community centre that's been taken over by a Muslim group. She's not happy about that and saying that it's out of character and it shouldn't be taking place. But I really want to thank her for her letter. Unfortunately, I can't read all of it out, but she's praised Talk and said it's the best ever station, so I really appreciate that, and thank you to everybody who gets in touch with us, no matter how it is, whether it's by phone. We'll take more phone calls in a minute or two, whether it's Terry in Birmingham who sent me a text message. Hi Peter, are there any promises this lousy government have made left to break, or are they contemplating making more? What an absolute shower. Or, you know, by WhatsApp message, for example, from Becca in Norfolk, who you can send them in on 0344 499 1000, as Becca has. It's all well and good people saying to build more prisons, but who's going to run them? They can't retain staff at the moment with the prisons we have. My son was a prison officer for 3 months. After 14 weeks training, he quit after seeing a horrific attack on his colleague and was told by the governor they couldn't have stepped in harder, the offender, because the inmate's human rights outweigh theirs, says Becca in Norfolk. I actually spoke to a young man earlier today. He is a former prison officer. He lasted a year, and he said, you know, 23 grand was not enough to live on, and very, very risky. And he was driving, I think, over an hour to his work as well. He said it just didn't work for him, and it was a very, very risky job as well. However you're getting in contact with us this evening, thank you. Thank you to Anne. Thank you to Mary. Thank you to everybody who's done that. This is my show, but it's your show too. And the correspondence we receive, however we receive it, is absolutely the lifeblood of it. That's why we've dedicated sections for calls, and even more of them, in fact, on my weekend shows on Saturday and Sunday between 10 and 1. I'll be here this weekend with those, and indeed right throughout the week here with Drive. We're also going to take a look inside The Sun, what they're reporting tomorrow. Will Barker, who's their Deputy Head of News, will join us in just a second, so stay tuned for that.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Christopher has been in touch and says Labour had plenty of time to get ready for government, and we were told that finally the adults were in the room. You listen to them now, blaming the previous government for all their woes. They lied to us again. They hadn't done their homework, and now we as the electorate are suffering as a consequence. And Steve in East Yorkshire says, why don't the Epping hotel protesters take their case to the ECHR? Surely putting 130 young men who we know nothing about in a local hotel, not under detention but free to go wherever they please, must present a significant risk to local people, especially women and children. Isn't that an infringement of their rights, given the government's first duty to protect its population, says Steve in East Yorkshire. Lots to discuss. Get your call in between now and 7 o'clock. I'll take as many calls as I can. 0344 499 1000. One thing we're talking about is a big story in The Sun tomorrow, and I'm delighted Will Barker, the Deputy Head of News, is with us in the studio. Hi, Will.
Hi.
On the Lamy, at least 3 more prisoners still on the run after being accidentally freed.
Well, the government have really opened up a bit of a Pandora's box with this, and the numbers keep coming out. And Lamy went to the dispatch box again today to try and explain how he was getting on top of it, but yet more numbers came out. 91 lags have got out since April, and 3 are still on the run. And the Tories are obviously making hay with this. Jenrick's described them as Lamy's lags. There's like a whole new phase of prisoners who can just waltz out any time. And
that's what we're hearing actually from Mark Hammersley, former prison governor, just a minute ago. There's a lot of them who overstay as well and then get compensation for doing so. I'm sure you'll have full coverage of that in The Sun tomorrow. Tell us about Gaza. Paul Gascoigne's ghostwriter had to transcribe their chats as AI could not understand his Geordie accent. So the former editor, who is the former editor of the Daily Telegraph, former editor of The Spectator, he's a member of the House of Lords, and he's railed against the BBC on many occasions. His name is Charles Moore.
Yes.
I say Moore. How do you say it?
Moore.
Yeah. You see, I've been criticised for pronunciation of that today, but Gaza apparently is
it's a bit
beyond AI.
Yeah, it's a bit like if you try and get Alexa to do anything, it just doesn't. It sort of kicks back and won't help. But his Paul Ghostwrite had this on a massive scale because he did this huge interview with him for this book, and then went to go and try and transcribe through AI to save a sort of job save, and AI just didn't understand Gaza's accent. Couldn't get any of it down, so she ended up having to write the whole thing down by hand.
I mean, I love the Geordie accent. I think it's a really nice accent. It's a beautiful kind of regional accent, but he does have quite a heavy accent, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's very heavy.
Yeah.
YI and all that.
Less YI, more AI. Did AI eventually learn it, or what?
No. She just had to write them all down. Literally had to write it all down.
That's a labour of love.
Now.
Goodness me. Tell us about Raheem Sterling. He's had another terrifying home invasion.
Yeah, so I covered this back in 2022 when he you might remember he dashed back from the England squad during the World Cup, and his Cobham house had been done. And obviously his raiders kind of quite sharp and know that these guys are away and sort of pinpoint these houses. And then Saturday night, thinking presumably that Raheem would be off with the Chelsea team, went and targeted his house and broke in, but on this occasion found Raheem, because he's not actually playing at the moment, found in there with his family. We've got some exclusive details that we've learnt on that, which we're doing big tomorrow. But these guys ran off, and we're not entirely sure what they've taken, but police are currently trying to track them down.
Yeah, another terrifying ordeal. Big court case today in regard to the crypto queen. Just tell us the detail of this, Will.
This is fascinating. I mean, the Met have really been blowing their trumpet on this really today, because the figures are just astronomical. So we think this woman is behind a £5 billion scam in which she's been sort of basically doing almost a Ponzi scheme where she's been sucking on all this Bitcoin from across the world, and she's now been jailed. I mean, for only 11 years, which seems quite short, really, because she's been they've been investigating this for about 11 years, and they've been tracing her all around the country. She's been here, there and everywhere. They nearly got her in 2018 because she's got some sort of big house in Hampstead or somewhere, but they let her slip through the fingers, and she's been living this life of luxury. And there's some pictures that they've put out today that they managed to track her down at an Airbnb and nicked her in bed, which was quite a strange thing. And she was carted off, and she won't be out for any time soon.
This must be one of the first real cases to do with crypto.
Yeah.
Big cases, anyway. Yeah.
I mean, the Met are calling it the biggest ever ever amount that they've got in, biggest investigation of its kind. People who've been on the end of internet scams will be glad that they're trying to fight back on this kind of thing.
I'm sensing Saran Jones or Keith Keeley Halls or Sarah Lancashire, who are by law the 3 mandated actresses.
Well, literally anything these days getting turned into TV drama. So yeah, I think you're probably right.
That's it. They will fictionalise anything, won't they?
Yeah.
Will, thank you very much indeed. Will Barker, their Deputy Head of News for The Sun. Let me know what you think of all the stories we're talking about today, whether it's Soldier F and the letter from the generals, whether it's the BBC, whether it's migration. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. I'll take calls right up to 7 o'clock when Kevin O'Sullivan takes over. Stay with us here on Talk.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thanks to lots of people who've been in touch on Twitter, including this person who says, we can't ignore the fact that it is in the DNA of the Labour Party to hate the armed forces and to support the enemies of the UK. This is supercharged by the current Labour Party being run by UK-hating human rights lawyers, says that person on Twitter. Ray says, I'm rapidly getting to the opinion that our government wants to undermine our armed forces, doing everything they can to mess our country up, even allowing chancers on dinghies to come here. Soon the Islamists will outnumber our army. Angie says, what a fantastic call earlier from David from Exeter, very knowledgeable. I've learned so much. You send people to fight, but afterwards you condemn them, bully them and tell them they're wrong to do it. It is horrific. Thanks to Elle as well, who says, has brought to my attention the Metropolitan Police say that they're aware of the posters about Zionists in Kentish Town, that's in North London, outside where Bob Villan will perform later this evening. The Metropolitan Police say we're aware of this and the posters have since been removed. Officers are investigating the posters as a hate crime and inquiries are ongoing, and Elle says at least this is a step in the right direction. On the BBC, Nat says, hi Peter, the only good thing the BBC has ever given me is EastEnders, the show I love to catch on every 10 to 15 years, like I would catch up with an old friend, especially as I can always count on a handful of familiar faces. Well, thank you for that. Lots on the BBC coming in, including this voice note from Carl.
Don't know why anybody is surprised about what's happened with the Epping, the Bal Hotel, because if it had gone the other way, that's the right decision. This is a Labour government. They don't do right decisions. They haven't done a bloody thing right so far. Of course it was going to go this way.
Sorry, that was on the Bell Hotel, obviously, rather than the BBC. Sandra has messaged me about the BBC with a voice note.
Following on from this speech that was doctored by the BBC, are other speeches going to be examined now, made in the recent past by people that the BBC employees didn't approve of? Because it'd be very interesting, I think, to look into those to see if this is just a one-off.
I think you're right, Sandra, and the problem is when you have some form of lack of trust or some change in how seriously we take the BBC, especially a documentary like Panorama, well, a documentary series like Panorama, well, actually, if we can't trust them, who can we trust? And you will be having a sceptical eye on all sorts of other things as well, especially in a world of AI as well. We have to double check every single thing, every single video we broadcast for AI, because these things can be created very, very quickly and convincingly as well. Let's hear a final voice note on the BBC from Rob.
The BBC on a single subscription would never work, as there simply isn't enough content to make it worthwhile. And I mean, see, at the moment they spend so much money on things like BBC Alba and the BBC Asian network and all the regional programming as well, that is, quite frankly, you know, it's hard to imagine that would ever be cost effective.
Yeah, Rob, it's really interesting, and that's part of the BBC's remit, to do things that necessarily, you know, aren't cost effective. Children's programming, for example, will probably never make a profit. News is something where it's very difficult to make a profit, actually, by doing straight news. So it's a really interesting one, actually, in terms of what can be done, how profits can be made, and what public service broadcasting should be. My thought on that should be that the BBC, I think it should exist. I think it should be completely impartial. And I don't think it needs to do things like Strictly Come Dancing or The Traitors, actually. I think the Apprentice or those kind of series, because I think the commercial sector would pick them up and they are commercially successful and they would put them forward and they would broadcast them and people could watch them and that would be fine. If the BBC is there to do things that other commercial rivals can't do, well then maybe children's programming, maybe news, although that's in lots of different places as well, arts programmes. There are things that I think the BBC should have a role to do, but it's too big and it's certainly out of control. Final voice note this evening, this is from Nevin on soldiers and human rights.
Just on these, this report around the soldiers and the complete and utter undermining of our armed forces, we appear to be using new human rights, new lawfare legislation. I thought the General spoke very well on this point, to prosecute soldiers from a conflict situation in Northern Ireland where they were having to make split-second decisions against terrorists or would-be terrorists, and they're now being prosecuted retrospectively for that under legislation that didn't even exist. Now, I'm no lawyer, but even I know that you cannot and should not be prosecuted under such circumstances for laws that didn't exist at the time of the alleged crime. This is purely politically motivated. We know that from the Soldier F case, where the judge in question said that the evidence presented fell, and I quote, well short of what was needed for a credible prosecution or even a conviction.
Thank you, Nevin, for that. I want to speak to James in Devon, who's given me a ring about the BBC. James, you're very welcome to the programme. Thanks for ringing 0344 499 1000. What would you like to say? James.
Hi, Peter.
Hi there.
Yeah, Peter, as far as I'm concerned, the BBC is a monolith. It needs to be basically ripped to pieces, including its radio, its news, its media. It is riddled. It is a captured organisation. We're not just talking about one or two errors here, Peter. We're talking about stories going out on BBC Verify about car insurance, which had to be taken off the website.
That's right. That's correct. Yeah.
Only inaccurate. We've had the Brexit fiasco. We've had Donald Trump. We've had this general election. We've had how the BBC basically covers the government and the Labour Party, and migration. Of course, it's a regular migration. It is riddled with left-wing elitist partisans who keep the Guardian in stock there. It's got to be rid of, Peter. We've got to split it up. We've got to sell it.
Is there anything it could do in its current form to regain your trust?
No, the BBC News team is riddled, Peter. It is no longer a news team anymore. It is journalism hiding under activism. It is nothing more than propaganda by these left-wing journalists. We've had enough of it. The BBC needs to be ripped apart. It needs to be sold off. Simple as that.
James, thank you. That's James in Devon. I should say that, I work for the BBC and I was as impartial as I possibly could be. I have a lot of people I know who work for the BBC who are impartial people who take that seriously, and I'm going to be brutally honest, I feel slightly sorry for them actually in the last few days. If you are a BBC employee, journalist, producer, whatever, and you come into work every day, as I did for a number of years, and said, right, whatever my personal views, I leave them at the door. I say, this is what this person says, this is what this other person says, they disagree, here is the story. I remember covering stories that I felt very personally, very strongly about, and had to calmly and rationally see both sides and present that and do that as the news. There wasn't a single complaint about anything I did at the BBC, and I tried to be as impartial as possible there and at other organisations where impartiality was meant to be the benchmark of what they did, like the ITV, for example, Sky News. But it just doesn't seem to be the case anymore for so many people, although there are those who keep flying that flag and keep trying to do the job that they're paid to do and what the Royal Charter says the BBC should do. Let's take a couple more calls. Tarquin's in London and Tony's in Suffolk. Let's speak to Tarquin first. Go ahead, Tarquin.
Hi, Peter.
Hi
nice, great show tonight. What I was going to say, obviously, James there has kind of stole a little bit of my thunder, just to say that what I'm a bit fed up of hearing is people like Lisa Nandy in a common statement kind of conflating the fluffiness of the children BBC legacy with the blatant propaganda of the news department. Ergo, we must split the two into literally what the Americans did with IBM back in the 80s when Judge Green broke up IBM because it was massively monolithic and it was monopolizing the entire sector. In a similar situation, we've got to break away from this notion that, the BBC is so nice, look at all the lovely kiddies program. And that is the fig leaf for the left-wing woke propaganda, as everyone's been saying in the last few. And it is absolutely true. It needs to be broken up. The Charter in 27 renewal, I don't see why the next government, let's assume it's going to be reformed based on current polling, has to have their hands tied for another, is it going to be a decade, would it, Peter, before the next renewal?
Well, it'll be in a few years' time, and Lisa Nandy was talking about that today, but we'll see what happens there, Tarquin. We'll see how impartiality can be brought back to the core of what the BBC does, if it can, or if, as we were hearing about a little bit earlier on, maybe it should be broken up and sold off. Tarquin, thanks for your thoughts. Tony is in Suffolk and has given me a ring, 0344 499 1000. Tony, you're very welcome to the programme. What would you like to say?
Good evening, Good evening, Peter. A brilliant show tonight, like other people have said. But yes, the BBC being defended by our current government. It just seems like they're just covering up for them. Is it an old boys' club? Is it, I don't know what's going on. It's not.
They're certainly reacting to this in a very drastic way.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, they're. It's almost like they want to cover it up. We had the Jimmy Savile, Hugh Edwards. It's just like, don't talk about it. Like all your other presenters say, if we don't talk about it, it might just go away. But people are just so fed up. I saw the light 3 years ago and stopped paying my TV licence. I don't watch live TV. There's nothing on the BBC worth watching. Unfortunately, apart from, there are some good, like you said, there are some good people in the BBC. There's some good programmes that come out of it. And it's a shame it's all being tarred with the same brush.
Yeah, I know. It's fascinating that so many people feel the way you do, and there have been a large number of people who've decided not to pay their licence fees, and I just wonder if there's anything the BBC could do that you could bring your trust back, switch on the news at 10 o'clock at night or whatever, and think, actually, they're telling me the truth.
I think it's too late for the news team. They've shot themselves in the foot. They do make some brilliant wildlife programmes. Dave Attenborough, is a hero for the country.
National treasure. Yeah.
But such a small percentage of what they do is good and covered up by wokeness, and like you've been saying, people who just won't see the real side of life.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
The common person, like me, maybe yourself, if you class yourself as a common person, they've had enough.
Yeah, I certainly.
This poor old country is going down the Swanee.
Tony, thank you for your thoughts. Really appreciate that. Kevin is with me
Peter.
now, and on the other side of the news. How are you doing?
I'm good. I think the most extraordinary thing about this ongoing legal saga involving Donald Trump, you know what he's like. He will sue if the BBC don't handle this right.
Yes.
In fact, I suspect he will anyway. He's a litigious kind of guy, particularly against media companies.
Yes.
The BBC's strategy, we understand, is going to be to fight him and say that by deliberately making it look as if he called for violent insurrection against Capitol Hill, by splicing together that tape, by doctoring that tape, by manipulating that tape, they did not do him any meaningful damage. So when people complain and say, oh, well, if we lose this lawsuit, it's going to cost licence fee payers loads and loads of money. Well, if they go down that route,